The aircraft hummed with the familiar white noise of pre-flight preparations. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency, helping passengers stow their luggage and find their seats. It was a full flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, and Michael Bennett was grateful he'd managed to secure an aisle seat in the third row. After a week of intense meetings and briefings, all he wanted was to get home with minimal fuss. He adjusted his navy blue blazer and settled into his seat, pulling out his phone to send a quick text to his wife before takeoff. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through the ambient noise. "I believe you're in my seat." Michael looked up to see a middle-aged white woman with immaculately styled blonde hair staring down at him. Her designer handbag hung from the crook of her elbow, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. He recognized the look immediately. He'd seen it countless times before. "I don't think so," he replied calmly, reaching into his pocket for his boarding pass. "I'm in 3C. The woman's eyes narrowed as she glanced at her own ticket. "Well, I'm supposed to be in this row, and I'd prefer the aisle." Michael kept his expression neutral, though he couldn't help but notice how she hadn't bothered to check if their seats actually matched before making her claim. "I'm sorry, but I specifically selected this seat when I booked my flight." His tone was polite but firm. "Your ticket should show your assigned seat." The woman's nostrils flared slightly. She looked around the cabin, making a show of scanning the other passengers before leaning in closer. "Look, I have a connecting flight to catch in San Francisco. I need to be able to exit quickly when we land." "I understand," Michael said, "but I also selected this seat for a reason." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to justify his right to sit in his assigned seat. The woman huffed, her cheeks flushing. "Fine," she snapped, checking her ticket again. "I'm in 3B then." She gestured impatiently for Michael to stand so she could access the middle seat. Michael rose and stepped into the aisle, allowing her to move past him. As she settled in, he caught the unmistakable scent of expensive perfume mingled with the sharper odor of discontent. He sat back down, consciously maintaining the boundary of his armrest, and returned to his phone. "Could you not do that?" the woman asked after barely 30 seconds, nodding toward his phone. Michael looked up, puzzled. "Pardon me?" "The tapping," she said, as if explaining something to a child. "It's very distracting." Michael had been typing a message to his wife, letting her know he was boarding on time. He'd been on hundreds of flights, and no one had ever complained about the sound of his texting before. Still, he nodded and put his phone away. No need to create tension for a 5-hour flight. A young white man in his 20s approached and took the window seat, greeting them both with a cheerful "Hey there" before settling in. The woman smiled warmly at him, immediately engaging in conversation about his reason for traveling to San Francisco. Their friendly chatter felt like a pointed contrast to the cold reception Michael had received. As the final passengers boarded, Michael closed his eyes briefly, mentally reviewing the details of the case he'd been working on in Atlanta. The human trafficking ring they'd been tracking had operations up and down the East Coast, and the information he'd gathered this week could be the brake they needed to shut down their West Coast connections. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2783 to San Francisco." The captain's voice broke through his thoughts. "Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Michael fastened his seatbelt and settled back. Next to him, the woman shifted uncomfortably, her elbow deliberately encroaching on his space. He adjusted his position, giving her a brief glance. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, but the tightness in her jaw suggested deliberate intent. The plane began to taxi, and Michael took out a book, a biography of Thurgood Marshall he'd been trying to finish for weeks. He was 2 pages in when he felt something wet seep into his pants. He looked down to see coffee spreading across his thigh, the woman beside him hurriedly righting her cup. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, though her tone lacked any genuine remorse. The plane jolted. The plane had been moving smoothly down the taxiway. There had been no jolt. "No problem," Michael replied evenly, reaching for a napkin from his pocket. The coffee wasn't hot enough to burn, but it would leave a stain. He dabbed at his pants, acutely aware of the woman watching him with something that looked almost like satisfaction. The young man by the window offered him additional napkins. "That's rough, man. Need anything else?" "I'm good, thanks," Michael said with a nod of appreciation. The woman shifted again, creating more distance between herself and Michael, pressing closer to the young man by the window. Her body language was clear. She didn't want to be near him. "First time to San Francisco?" the young man asked Michael, apparently trying to diffuse the awkwardness. Before Michael could answer, the woman cut in. "I don't think he's going to San Francisco," she said, her voice carrying an undercurrent of implication. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I live there." "Really?" The skepticism in her voice was unmistakable. "What neighborhood?" "I'm in Pacific Heights," he replied, naming one of the city's most affluent areas. Her expression flickered with disbelief. "What do you do there?" The question hung in the air, loaded with assumptions. Michael had faced this line of questioning countless times, people who couldn't conceive that a black man might naturally belong in spaces they considered their exclusive domain. "I work for the government," he said simply, returning to his book. She murmured, the sound dripping with doubt. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted off, and for a blessed few minutes, the rumble of takeoff precluded further conversation. Michael tried to focus on his reading, but he couldn't help noticing how the woman kept glancing at him sidelong, her attention repeatedly drawn to his hands, his clothes, his book, assessing him, finding him suspicious in ways she couldn't articulate. Once they reached cruising altitude, the flight attendants began their service. A young black woman named Tanisha, according to her name tag, made her way down the aisle with the beverage cart. "What can I get you?" she asked when she reached their row. The young man ordered a ginger ale and the woman requested white wine. When Tanisha turned to Michael with a smile, he asked for water. As Tanisha poured his drink, the woman beside him raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me, is there any chance of moving seats? It's rather cramped here." Tanisha's professional smile didn't waver. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the flight is completely full today. We don't have any open seats." "Are you sure? I thought I saw an empty seat in first class when I boarded." "Those seats are all occupied, ma'am," Tanisha replied calmly. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with a pillow or blanket." The woman pursed her lips. "Never mind." She took her wine without a thank you and turned away. Michael caught Tanisha's eye and gave her a small, knowing smile of gratitude. She returned it with a subtle nod before moving on to the next row. 30 minutes into the flight, Michael felt the woman's eyes on him again. She had been watching him flip through his book, her gaze heavy with suspicion. When he turned slightly toward her, she immediately looked away. "Is something wrong?" he asked quietly. "No," she said quickly, then paused. "Actually, you keep moving around a lot. It's making me nervous." Michael had adjusted his position once to retrieve a pen from his pocket. "I'm sorry if that bothered you," he said, keeping his voice level. "I was just getting comfortable." She didn't respond, but her body remained tense. A few minutes later, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," she said curtly, not waiting for Michael to fully stand before pushing past him into the aisle. He watched as she made her way to the front of the cabin, where she bent to speak quietly with one of the flight attendants. Her gestures were animated, and she kept glancing back toward their row. Michael knew what was happening. He'd experienced it before, though usually in stores, restaurants, or on the street. never trapped in a metal tube 30,000 feet in the air. He took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for what was coming. Sure enough, the flight attendant, not Tanisha, but an older white woman with a practiced customer service smile, approached their row. "Sir," she said, bending slightly to address Michael, "could I have a word with you in the galley? May I ask what this is about?" Michael's voice remained calm, but he was acutely aware of the other passengers now watching the interaction with curious eyes. "It won't take long," the flight attendant replied, her smile never wavering. "Just a quick word." Michael unbuckled his seatbelt and followed her to the front of the plane, conscious of the stares following him. The woman who had been sitting next to him stood by the cockpit door, arms crossed, a look of vindication on her face. In the small galley area, another flight attendant and the lead purser had gathered, creating an impromptu tribunal. Michael stood tall, his shoulders square, his expression composed. He'd done nothing wrong, and he knew it. The real question was whether they knew it too. "Sir," the lead purser began, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a practiced diplomatic air. "We've received a complaint that you've been making another passenger uncomfortable." "In what way?" Michael asked. "She says you've been acting suspiciously, moving around a lot, and she noticed you have a package that you keep checking." Michael almost laughed. The package was his book. "I've been reading," he said, pulling the Marshall biography from his jacket pocket. "This is what I've been checking." The purser's expression shifted slightly. Embarrassment, perhaps, or recognition of the absurdity of the situation. "I see. Well, there seems to be a misunderstanding." "No, there's not," the woman interjected, stepping forward. "He's been acting strange since boarding. I don't feel safe sitting next to him." "Ma'am," the purser began, "I don't see any cause for—" "Don't you have a responsibility to ensure passenger safety?" she interrupted, her voice rising enough that passengers in the first few rows turned to look. "If I don't feel safe, that should be enough." Michael observed the dynamic shifting. The crew was caught between handling a vocal, upset passenger and acknowledging the obvious, that her discomfort stemmed not from any actual threat, but from her own prejudice. "Perhaps we could reseat one of you," suggested the female flight attendant, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "As you told the passenger earlier, this is a full flight," Michael pointed out quietly. "There aren't any empty seats." The woman's eyes narrowed. Well, then he should be moved to the back at least. And there it was, the mask slipping, revealing what this was really about. The galley fell silent, the crew members exchanging glances. Even the woman seemed to realize she'd said too much. Michael took a breath, his hand instinctively moving to the inside pocket of his jacket, where his credentials sat in their leather wallet. He'd hoped to avoid this, to handle the situation like any other civilian would have to. But sometimes, the only way to counter power was with power of your own. "I think," he said, his voice measured but carrying a weight that made everyone present stand a little straighter, "that we should discuss exactly what's happening here." Michael pulled out his credentials and flipped open the leather wallet, revealing the gold badge and ID card that identified him as a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "My name is Special Agent Michael Bennett," he said, his voice now carrying an unmistakable authority that filled the small galley space. "I'm returning from an operation in Atlanta to my field office in San Francisco." The silence that followed was deafening. The purser's eyes widened and the female flight attendant took an instinctive step backward. But it was the woman's reaction that was most dramatic. Her face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. I didn't know," she finally stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. "No, you didn't," Michael agreed calmly, tucking his credentials back into his jacket. "You made assumptions based on what you saw, not on what you knew." The purser cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Agent Bennett, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Of course, you're welcome to return to your seat." Michael fixed the purser with a steady gaze. "I don't think this was a misunderstanding at all. I think we all know exactly what happened here." The woman's face flushed red. "Now wait just a minute," she said, finding her voice again. "I didn't know who you were. You can't blame me for being cautious." "Cautious about what exactly?" Michael interrupted, his tone still even, but with an edge that made the woman fall silent again. "What specific behavior did I exhibit that warranted concern?" No one answered. The woman looked at the floor, then at the flight attendants, as if hoping someone would come to her defense. No one did. Michael turned to the purser. "I'd like to return to my seat now. We can discuss this further after we land, if necessary." "Of course, sir," the purser said quickly, relief evident in his voice. "Ma'am," he added, turning to the woman, "you'll need to return to your seat as well. The seatbelt sign is still on." "I am not sitting next to him," she declared, panic edging into her voice. "I'd be happy to change seats with someone," Michael offered diplomatically. "Not because this passenger's concerns are valid, but because I'd rather not spend the next 4 hours sitting next to someone who considers my presence a threat." The young man from the window seat had appeared in the galley, curiosity having apparently gotten the better of him. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said. "I'm in 3A. I'd be happy to switch with someone if that helps." The purser looked relieved at this potential solution. "That's very kind. Perhaps, ma'am, you could take the window seat, and this gentleman can sit in the middle?" The woman's lips thinned, but she nodded stiffly, apparently realizing she had few options left. The four of them made their way back to row 3, where Tanisha was waiting with a concerned expression. She caught Michael's eye, and he gave her a small nod, letting her know everything was under control. As they rearranged themselves, the young man taking the middle seat, the woman reluctantly sliding into the window position, and Michael reclaiming his aisle seat, the tension was palpable. Other passengers who had been watching the drama unfold now quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be absorbed in their books or the safety cards in the seat back pockets. Michael settled back into his seat, straightened his blazer, and reopened his book, outwardly calm though his mind was racing. In 15 years with the Bureau, he'd faced prejudice in countless forms, but it never got easier to be reduced to a stereotype, to be viewed as inherently suspicious simply because of his skin color. The young man beside him shifted awkwardly. "I'm Dylan, by the way," he said quietly, extending his hand. "Michael," he replied, accepting the handshake. "That was intense," Dylan said, keeping his voice low. "I'm sorry that happened." Michael appreciated the sentiment, though he was well aware that an apology from one well-meaning white person didn't change the system that made incidents like this commonplace. Still, allies were important. "Thank you," he said simply. The woman stared rigidly ahead, pretending to be fascinated by the in-flight magazine. Her body language screamed discomfort, pressed as far against the window as physically possible. About 20 minutes later, Tanisha stopped by their row with a fresh round of drinks. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked Michael, placing a bottle of water on his tray table. "This is perfect, thank you," he replied. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "The captain would like to speak with you when it's convenient. No rush." Michael nodded his understanding. It wasn't surprising. An FBI agent being harassed on a flight warranted the captain's attention. He finished his water, waited a reasonable amount of time, then made his way to the cockpit. The captain, an older white man with silver hair visible beneath his cap, greeted Michael with a firm handshake. "Agent Bennett, I'm Captain Reynolds. I want to personally apologize for what happened. My purser filled me in." "I appreciate that, Captain," Michael replied. Look, we take these situations very seriously, Reynolds continued, his expression grave. I want you to know that this kind of behavior is not tolerated on my aircraft. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, we'll fully support that process. Michael considered the offer. A complaint would mean paperwork, interviews, possibly even legal proceedings. The woman would face consequences, yes, but would it change her beliefs? Would it help the next black passenger she encountered in another setting? I'll think about it, he said finally. Right now, I'd just like to get home. Reynolds nodded. Of course, but I want to assure you, this isn't the end of it. The airline will be addressing this regardless. Michael thanked him and returned to his seat. As he settled in, he noticed Dylan watching him with undisguised curiosity. Was that guy really the captain? Dylan whispered once Michael was seated. Yes, Michael confirmed, keeping his voice low. Cool, Dylan said, then hesitated. So you're really FBI? That's like your actual job? Despite the circumstances, Michael couldn't help but smile at the young man's earnest interest. Yes, that's really my job. That's awesome, Dylan said, his eyes lighting up. I'm studying criminal justice at UCLA. I've thought about applying to the Bureau after graduation. It's rewarding work, Michael replied, careful not to glamorize the reality of a career that often involved long hours, dangerous situations, and, as today had demonstrated, dealing with society's persistent prejudices. The woman shifted in her window seat, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation taking place beside her. Her body remained angled away from them, but Michael could tell she was listening to every word. The next hour passed in relative calm. Dylan alternated between asking Michael questions about FBI work, most of which Michael deflected with good humor, and dozing off against the headrest. The woman remained silent, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed either on the window or the seat in front of her. Michael was about halfway through his book when a commotion several rows back caught his attention. A passenger was shouting at a flight attendant, his words unintelligible from this distance, but his aggressive tone clear. Michael turned in his seat to get a better look. A heavy-set man in his 40s was standing in the aisle, face flushed with anger, pointing his finger at a visibly shaken female flight attendant. Even from a distance, Michael could smell the alcohol. Without hesitation, Michael stood up. "Excuse me," he murmured to Dylan, stepping into the aisle and making his way toward the disturbance. As he approached, he could hear the man's slurred complaints. "Paid good money for this flight, and you're telling me you're out of the whiskey I want? This is bull." "Sir," Michael interrupted, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority, "I need you to lower your voice and return to your seat." The man turned, his bleary eyes focusing on Michael with difficulty. "Who the hell are you? Mind your own business." Michael moved closer, positioning himself between the man and the flight attendant. "Federal agent," he said quietly, not wanting to create more of a scene than necessary. "This is my business. Now please sit down before this becomes a bigger problem for you." The man wavered, his bravado deflating somewhat when confronted with authority. "I just wanted another drink," he muttered. "I understand," Michael replied, not unkindly. "But you need to return to your seat now. The flight attendants are doing their job, and they deserve to be treated with respect." After a moment's hesitation, the man slumped back into his seat, muttering under his breath but no longer shouting. Michael nodded to the flight attendant, who mouthed a silent, "Thank you," her relief evident. As Michael turned to head back to his own seat, he found himself face to face with the woman who had tried to have him removed. She had apparently gotten up to use the lavatory and now stood frozen in the aisle, having witnessed the entire exchange. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Something shifted in her expression, not quite remorse, but perhaps the uncomfortable recognition of her own misjudgment. Michael said nothing, simply stepping aside to let her pass, his point made without words. When he returned to his seat, Dylan was wide awake and grinning. "That was so cool," he whispered. "You totally shut that guy down." Michael shook his head slightly. "It's not about shutting people down. It's about maintaining safety and respect." "Still cool," Dylan insisted. The woman returned a few minutes later, sliding past them to reclaim her window seat. Michael noticed that she no longer pressed herself against the wall quite so dramatically. Her posture remained stiff, but something had changed. She glanced at him once, quickly, then away. The remainder of the flight passed without incident. As they began their descent into San Francisco, the captain's voice came over the intercom, thanking passengers for their patience during the minor disturbance and announcing their arrival time. Michael closed his book, having made it through another few chapters despite the interruptions. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, passengers began the familiar ritual of gathering belongings and queuing in the aisles. Michael remained seated in no rush to join the crush. Dylan stood up, retrieving his backpack from the overhead compartment. "It was really nice meeting you," he said to Michael. "Thanks for, being cool about everything." Michael smiled. "Take care, Dylan. Good luck with your studies." As Dylan made his way forward, the woman finally turned to face Michael. She had been silent for the majority of the flight, but now she seemed determined to speak. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice stiff but sincere. "I made assumptions that were unfair." Michael studied her for a moment. The apology was a start, but it was clear she still didn't fully grasp the gravity of what she had done, how her actions represented a larger pattern that affected people without FBI badges to protect them. "I accept your apology," he said finally, "but I hope you understand something. Today, my credentials protected me from your prejudice. Most people who look like me don't have that luxury. They just have to endure it." She flinched slightly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I'm not prejudiced," she said, but the protest sounded hollow even to her own ears. "We all have biases," Michael replied. "The question is whether we recognize them and work to overcome them or let them control our actions." He paused, then added, "I hope our interaction today gives you something to think about." He stood as the aisle began to clear, retrieving his carry-on from the overhead bin. The woman remained seated, looking thoughtful, perhaps even troubled. Michael didn't wait for a response. He'd said what needed to be said. As he made his way off the plane, Tanisha caught his eye. "Thank you for handling that situation, Agent Bennett," she said quietly. "Both of them." "Just doing my job," he replied with a small smile. "No," she said, shaking her head slightly. "You were doing much more than that. Safe travels." Michael nodded his thanks and continued toward the exit, where the bright California sunshine awaited. Today had been challenging, but ultimately productive. Perhaps the woman would reflect on her actions and change, perhaps not. But Michael had stood his ground with dignity and used his position to shed light on an ugly truth, and sometimes that was the most important part of the job. The San Francisco International Airport buzzed with activity as Michael made his way through the terminal. He pulled his carry-on behind him with one hand, his other hand holding his phone as he checked his messages. A text from his wife, Lisa. "Hope your flight was okay. Dinner's in the oven. Love you." Michael smiled and typed a quick reply. "Just landed. Flight was interesting. Tell you about it when I get home. Love you too." He was about to pocket his phone when it buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed Director Harrington. Michael sighed. So much for going straight home. He answered, stepping to the side of the busy walkway. "Bennett," he said. "Michael, good to hear your voice," came the response. Director Catherine Harrington spoke with the clipped efficiency that had become her trademark during her 3 years heading the San Francisco field office. "I know you just landed, but we need you to come in." "Has something happened with the Atlanta case?" Michael asked, immediately alert. "No, but something else has come up. I'd rather brief you in person. How soon can you get here?" Michael checked his watch. With traffic, it would take about 45 minutes to reach the federal building downtown. "I can be there by 5:30. "Good. Come straight to my office." Harrington hung up without further pleasantries. Michael texted Lisa again, letting her know about the change of plans, then headed toward the exit to catch a taxi. As he walked, he noticed a familiar figure ahead of him. The woman from the plane, waiting at the rideshare pickup area, her attention focused on her phone. For a moment he considered simply walking past her, but something made him stop. "Ma'am," he said as he approached. She looked up, startled, her expression immediately shifting to one of discomfort when she recognized him. "Agent Bennett. I just wanted to say I hope you meant what you said on the plane, about being sorry." She swallowed, glancing around as if looking for an escape. Finding none, she nodded stiffly. "I did." "Good," Michael said, "because what happened today doesn't just affect me. It affects my son, who's had security called on him for shopping in upscale stores. It affects my colleagues, who get pulled over on their way to crime scenes. It affects millions of people who don't have a badge to protect them from assumptions like the ones you made." The woman's face reddened, but she didn't interrupt. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," Michael continued, his voice calm but direct. "I'm telling you because the next time you feel that instinct, to see a black person as a threat without cause, I hope you'll remember this conversation." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again, more genuinely this time. "I will. I really am sorry." "Then something good came out of today," Michael said with a small nod. "Take care." He walked away, feeling lighter somehow. He had no illusions that one conversation would magically transform someone's deep-seated prejudices, but perhaps it was a start. Sometimes that was all you could hope for, small moments of awareness that might eventually lead to change. 40 minutes later, Michael walked through the security checkpoint at the federal building, nodding to the guards who recognized him. The San Francisco field office occupied several floors, a maze of cubicles, conference rooms, and specialized departments that had become Michael's second home over the past 8 years. As he made his way to Director Harrington's office, he greeted colleagues with brief nods and waves. At 39, Michael was one of the more experienced agents in the office, respected for his calm demeanor in crisis situations and his knack for seeing connections others missed. Harrington's assistant, a meticulous man named Paul, looked up as Michael approached. "She's expecting you, Agent Bennett," he said, gesturing toward the closed door. Michael knocked once and entered. Director Catherine Harrington sat behind her desk, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in its usual severe bun. At 55, she had the kind of authority that commanded a room without raising her voice. 2 other people were seated in front of her desk, Assistant Director James Wilson and, to Michael's surprise, Deputy Director Calvin Pierce from FBI headquarters in Washington. "Bennett, good, have a seat," Harrington said, gesturing to the empty chair. "You know Assistant Director Wilson, and this is Deputy Director Pierce." Michael shook hands with both men, his curiosity piqued by Pierce's presence. The Deputy Director rarely traveled to field offices for routine matters. "How was Atlanta?" Harrington asked. "Productive," Michael replied. "We've confirmed links between the East Coast operation and contacts here in California. With the new evidence, we should be able to move on the San Francisco cell within the week." Harrington nodded, satisfied. "Good work. But that's not why we called you in today." She nodded to Pierce. The Deputy Director leaned forward, his hands clasped on his knee. "Agent Bennett, what do you know about Congressman Thomas Morgan?" Michael considered the question. Fourth-term Republican from California's 10th District, sits on the Homeland Security Committee, known for his tough stance on immigration and border security. Correct, Pierce said. He's also behind a new bill that would significantly increase funding for ICE and Border Patrol operations, while simultaneously reducing oversight of those agencies. The bill has strong support, Wilson added. It's expected to pass, despite concerns from civil liberties groups. Michael waited, knowing there had to be more to the story than a political briefing. Harrington slid a folder across her desk. 2 days ago, we received information suggesting that Morgan may be involved in a bribery scheme, specifically that he's receiving payments from a private security corporation called Sentinel Group in exchange for ensuring they receive lucrative government contracts through his committee. Michael opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Financial reports, meeting schedules, photographs of Morgan with various individuals, some of whom Michael recognized as executives from major security firms. The source is credible? He asked, looking up. Pierce nodded. Very. A former Sentinel employee who came forward with documentation showing suspicious transfers to a shell company that we believe is linked to Morgan. We need you to lead the investigation, Harrington said, getting to the heart of the matter. Quietly, carefully, and by the book. If these allegations are true, we're talking about corruption at a very high level. If they're not, we need to know that too, without creating a political firestorm. Michael understood the subtext. This was political dynamite, especially given the current climate. Morgan was a powerful figure with allies throughout Washington. Any investigation would need to be handled with extreme caution. Why me? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Harrington and Pierce exchanged a glance. It was Wilson who spoke up. You're thorough, methodical, and you don't let politics influence your work. Plus, you've handled sensitive investigations before without leaks or complications. There's another reason, Pierce added, his expression serious. Morgan has a history of, let's call them racially charged comments. If we assign a white agent as lead and he gets wind of the investigation, he'll cooperate just enough to appear compliant while obstructing behind the scenes. But if I lead it, Michael finished the thought, he'll likely underestimate me, possibly even let his guard down because of his own biases. Exactly, Pierce confirmed. It's not fair to ask you to leverage that kind of prejudice, but in this case, it might be the advantage we need, Michael said. He wasn't offended by the strategy. He'd used similar tactics before. Sometimes the best way to catch people was to let them believe their own stereotypes would protect them. So you'll take it? Harrington asked. Michael nodded. Yes. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. We're setting up a dedicated space on the 4th floor. You'll have a small team, hand-picked people we trust implicitly. This stays completely compartmentalized until we know what we're dealing with. Understood. Michael closed the folder. What about the Atlanta case? Agent Diaz will take point on that, Wilson said. She's been briefed and is ready to move forward with the operation as you planned it. Michael felt a twinge of disappointment. He'd been working the human trafficking case for months, but he understood the priority shift. If a sitting congressman was taking bribes to influence national security contracts, that represented a significant threat. I'll need everything we have on Morgan, he said. Personal history, financial records, associates, daily routines. It's being compiled as we speak, Harrington assured him. You'll have it all by morning. As the meeting wrapped up, Deputy Director Pierce walked with Michael toward the elevator. I heard about what happened on your flight, he said once they were alone in the hallway. Michael looked at him, surprised. Word travels fast. Pierce smiled slightly. The airline contacted us directly. Apparently they're concerned about potential liability. They wanted to assure the Bureau that they're taking it seriously. Michael shook his head. It was nothing I haven't dealt with before. That doesn't make it right, Pierce said, his expression somber. How did you handle it? By the book, Michael replied. Identified myself when necessary, diffused the situation, moved on. Pierce nodded thoughtfully. 25 years ago when I joined the Bureau, I was often the only black agent in the room. Things have changed, but not enough. Not nearly enough. They reached the elevator, and Pierce extended his hand. Good luck with the Morgan investigation. Keep me updated directly. As Michael drove home that evening, his mind alternated between the new case and the incident on the plane. In some ways, they were connected, both rooted in the same prejudices, the same flawed assumptions about who belonged where and who deserved respect. The sun was setting as he pulled into the driveway of his craftsman-style home in Pacific Heights. It had been his wife's dream house, and they'd purchased it 3 years ago after Lisa made partner at her law firm. The porch light was on, a warm beacon guiding him home. Inside, the smell of Lisa's lasagna filled the house. She greeted him in the kitchen, her smile fading as she took in his expression. That bad? She asked, accepting his kiss on the cheek. Just long, he replied, loosening his tie. Where's Marcus? Upstairs, finishing homework. He has a history test tomorrow. She studied his face. So what made your flight interesting? Michael sighed, leaning against the counter. The usual. Woman didn't want to sit next to me, tried to get me removed, claimed I was acting suspiciously. Lisa's expression darkened. What did you do? Showed her my badge when I had no other choice. She apologized, sort of. I had a word with her after we landed. Lisa nodded, knowing her husband well enough to understand he wouldn't have made a scene. And the Bureau called you in because... New case, Michael said, helping himself to a glass of water. Potential corruption involving Congressman Morgan. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Thomas Morgan? The one who said that diversity initiatives in federal agencies were undermining American security? The very same. And they're putting you in charge of investigating him? Lisa's tone was skeptical. That's going to be a minefield. That's exactly why they want me on it, Michael replied. They think Morgan's prejudices might work in our favor. Lisa was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. Sometimes I wonder if they realize how much they're asking of you. To not just do your job, but to navigate all the extra layers of politics and prejudice that come with it. It's part of the territory, Michael said, though he appreciated her understanding. Besides, I'm good at it. Too good sometimes, she murmured. Don't let them take advantage of that. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Seconds later, their 14-year-old son, Marcus, appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up when he saw his father. Dad, you're back. Marcus crossed the kitchen to give his father a quick hug. At 14, he was already showing signs of the man he would become, tall for his age, with his father's thoughtful eyes and his mother's quick smile. Just got in, Michael said, ruffling his son's hair. How's the studying going? Almost done, Marcus replied. World War II test tomorrow. Mr. Hansen says it's going to be tough. Want me to quiz you after dinner? Marcus nodded eagerly. That would be great. As they sat down to eat, Michael felt the tension of the day begin to dissipate. Here, with his family, he could set aside the weight of both professional responsibility and societal prejudice. Here, he was simply Michael, husband, father, himself. After dinner, as promised, Michael helped Marcus review for his history test. They sat at the dining room table, surrounded by textbooks and notes. Okay, one more, Michael said, scanning the study guide. What was the significance of the Yalta Conference? Marcus thought for a moment, then answered confidently. It was where Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met to discuss the post-war reorganization of Europe. They decided to divide Germany, and that led to a lot of the Cold War tensions later. Good, Michael nodded, impressed with his son's grasp of the material. You're going to ace this test. Marcus grinned, then his expression grew more serious. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. At school today, we were talking about careers, and I mentioned that you work for the FBI. Tyler Morris said his dad told him that black agents only get hired because of affirmative action, not because they're qualified. Marcus's voice was hesitant, as if unsure whether he should be repeating this. Michael felt a familiar ache in his chest. Marcus was at that vulnerable age, becoming increasingly aware of the world's inequities while still trying to form his own identity within it. What do you think about that? Michael asked, curious about his son's perspective. Marcus shrugged. I told him that was stupid. You went to Yale and were top of your class at Quantico. But he just laughed and said his dad knows how things really work. Michael took a moment to consider his response. He wanted to protect his son, but he also needed to prepare him for the realities he would face. Marcus, throughout your life, you're going to encounter people who will try to diminish your accomplishments or question whether you deserve your success. Sometimes they'll say it to your face like Tyler did today. More often they'll think it but not say it. So what do I do? Marcus asked. You do what you did today. You know your truth. You know what you've accomplished and what you're capable of. Don't let anyone else's ignorance define you or limit what you believe you can achieve. Marcus nodded slowly. Is that what you do at work? Michael smiled. Every day. And you know what? The people whose opinions actually matter, the ones who work alongside me, who see my results, who trust me with important cases, they know the truth too. They returned to studying, but Michael's mind kept returning to his son's question. How much of his life had been shaped by the need to prove himself, to be twice as good just to be considered equal? And now, with the Morgan investigation, he would once again need to navigate that delicate balance, using the congressman's prejudice as an investigative tool while ensuring his own work remained impeccable. Later that night, after Marcus had gone to bed, Michael sat in his home office reviewing the preliminary information on Congressman Morgan that had been sent to his secure email. Lisa appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. You should be resting, she said, placing 1 mug on his desk. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I just want to get a head start, Michael replied, gesturing to the screen. Morgan's not going to be an easy target. Lisa leaned against the door frame, studying her husband. You're thinking about what Marcus said, aren't you? Michael looked up, once again struck by his wife's perceptiveness. Among other things. Michael, you don't have to prove anything to anyone, she said softly, least of all to men like Morgan. I know that, he said, but this case isn't just about him. If he's compromising national security for personal gain, that affects everyone. Lisa nodded, understanding. Just don't forget who you're really doing this for. I never do, Michael assured her, thinking of Marcus upstairs, of the future they were trying to build for him. A future where he wouldn't have to face the same prejudices, the same barriers. But as Michael returned to his research, a part of him wondered if that future would ever truly arrive. Today on the plane, tomorrow in Congressman Morgan's office, the challenges might take different forms, but at their core, they remained disturbingly constant. Still, he would do what he had always done, his job to the best of his abilities, with the dignity and integrity that no amount of prejudice could diminish. It was all he could do, and sometimes, as he had seen on the plane today, it was enough to make a difference, even if only in small, incremental ways. With that thought, he turned back to his screen, diving deeper into the life and connections of Congressman Thomas Morgan, preparing for the investigation that would begin in earnest tomorrow morning. The dedicated space on the fourth floor turned out to be a formerly unused conference room, now transformed into an impromptu command center. When Michael arrived at 7:30 the next morning, tech specialists were still setting up secure computers and pinning information to bulletin boards. The room had no windows, a security measure rather than an oversight, and the harsh fluorescent lighting gave everything a sterile, clinical appearance. Agent Sofia Rodriguez was already there, reviewing files at a corner desk. At 32, she was one of the Bureau's rising stars, with a background in financial crimes and a reputation for finding patterns in data that others missed. She looked up as Michael entered, offering a brief smile. "Morning, Bennett. They really cleared this place out fast." "Harrington doesn't waste time," Michael agreed, setting his briefcase on the central table. "Have you been briefed?" Rodriguez nodded. "Got the basics last night. Congressman Morgan, potential bribery, high sensitivity. I've started mapping his financial history." She gestured to her laptop. "Interesting patterns already." "Let me see," Michael said, moving to look over her shoulder. Rodriguez pulled up a series of spreadsheets and charts. Morgan's official financial disclosures show a net worth of approximately $3.2 million. Not unusual for a congressman with his tenure, but when I started looking at his spending patterns compared to his reported income, she clicked to another screen. There are discrepancies. Nothing obvious, but over the past 2 years, he's been living about 20% above what his declared income should support. 20% could be explained by investments, inheritance, or other legitimate sources, Michael observed. "Could be," Rodriguez agreed. "But I checked those angles. No significant inheritance, his investment portfolio is solid but not spectacular, and his wife's income as a part-time consultant doesn't bridge the gap either. So where's the extra money coming from?" Rodriguez smiled thinly. "That's the question, isn't it?" The door opened, and 2 more agents entered. Jason Chen, a technology specialist with a decade of experience in digital forensics, and Marcus Walsh, a veteran agent who had worked organized crime cases for most of his career. "Team's complete," Michael said, straightening up. "Let's get started." For the next hour, they reviewed everything they had on Congressman Thomas Morgan. Born in Sacramento to a middle-class family, law degree from Stanford, 4 years as a prosecutor before entering politics. Married for 23 years to Elizabeth Morgan, 2 adult children. First elected to Congress 12 years ago, he had risen steadily through the ranks to become a powerful voice on national security issues. "Our source inside Sentinel Group provided these," Chen said, distributing copies of several emails. "They suggest that Morgan helped ensure Sentinel received a $40 million contract for security services at 3 federal buildings, despite their bid not being the lowest. Could be explained as preference for quality over cost," Walsh pointed out, playing devil's advocate. "Except that Sentinel's performance reviews have been mediocre at best," Chen countered. "And there's this." He handed out another document, this one showing a transfer of $200,000 to a company called Blue Ridge Consulting. "Blue Ridge is registered in Delaware," Rodriguez added. "On paper, it provides strategic advisory services. But when I looked into it, there's no evidence it's an actual functioning business. No employees, no office space, minimal transaction history, except for receiving payments from Sentinel and making distributions to an account we haven't identified yet." "A shell company," Michael said, examining the document. "Classic way to disguise bribes as consulting fees." "Exactly," Rodriguez confirmed. "And we believe Morgan is the beneficial owner of Blue Ridge, or at least controls it through an intermediary." Michael nodded, processing the information. "So our theory is that Sentinel pays Blue Ridge for non-existent consulting, and that money eventually makes its way to Morgan. who in turn uses his position on the Homeland Security Committee to steer contracts toward Sentinel. That's the outline, Walsh agreed. But we need proof of Morgan's connection to Blue Ridge and evidence that his committee actions were influenced by the payments. What about the whistleblower? Michael asked. How much do they know? Former mid-level finance executive at Sentinel, Chen explained. They saw the payments to Blue Ridge flagged as special relationship maintenance in internal documents, got suspicious and did some digging. They have emails from Sentinel's CEO referencing our friend in Congress and the need to keep the relationship well-funded. Suggestive but not definitive, Michael noted. We need more. The whistleblower also claims there were meetings between Morgan and Sentinel's CEO, Richard Tanner, that weren't on any official calendar, Rodriguez added. Private dinners, golf outings, all off the record. Michael considered this information, mapping out the investigation in his mind. All right, here's how we proceed. Rodriguez, I want you to keep digging into the financial angle. Find out where the money from Blue Ridge goes and see if you can establish a connection to Morgan or his family members. On it, she nodded. Chen, I need you to focus on electronic evidence. Emails, phone records, text messages, anything that might show communication between Morgan and Sentinel executives. Will do, Chen replied. I've already submitted warrants for Morgan's phone records, but it'll take time. Walsh, Michael continued, you've got the human intelligence side. Talk to staffers, former employees, anyone who might have observed Morgan's interactions with Sentinel. Be discreet. We don't want to tip him off. Walsh nodded, making notes. What about you? Rodriguez asked. Michael smiled slightly. I'm going to meet the congressman. All three agents looked up in surprise. Isn't that risky? Chen asked. If he realizes he's under investigation. He won't, Michael assured him. The Bureau has been wanting to brief key committee members on cybersecurity threats to election systems. It's a legitimate reason for me to meet with him, and it'll give me a chance to assess him in person. Clever, Walsh acknowledged. When will you do it? I've already asked Harrington to arrange it. Should happen in the next day or two. Michael checked his watch. Let's reconvene at 4 to share findings. In the meantime, remember, this investigation doesn't exist outside this room. As the team dispersed to their assigned tasks, Michael sat down with Morgan's file again, studying the congressman's photograph. Morgan was in his late 50s with silver hair and the confident smile of a man accustomed to power. There was nothing in his appearance that suggested corruption, but Michael had learned long ago that the most dangerous criminals often wore the most respectable faces. His phone buzzed with a text from Harrington. Meeting with Morgan set for tomorrow, 2 p.m., his D.C. office. Details to follow. Michael texted back a brief acknowledgement, then returned to his review of Morgan's background. The more he understood about the congressman, the better prepared he would be for tomorrow's meeting. By late afternoon, the team had made progress on several fronts. Rodriguez had traced payments from Blue Ridge Consulting to a Cayman Islands account. Chen had obtained preliminary phone records showing calls between Morgan's personal cell and Richard Tanner's, and Walsh had identified a former staffer who might be willing to talk. It's a good start, Michael told them during their 4 o'clock meeting. But we need more. Morgan's smart. He wouldn't leave obvious trails. What's your approach for tomorrow? Walsh asked. Michael leaned back in his chair. I'm going in as exactly what I am. An FBI agent briefing a congressman on a legitimate security concern. I'll observe his demeanor, his office, how he interacts with staff. Sometimes the most valuable intelligence comes from what people reveal when they think they're not being investigated. And if he underestimates you because of his biases? Rodriguez asked, the question delicate but direct. Then that's his mistake, Michael replied simply. And our advantage. After the meeting, Michael called Lisa to let her know he'd be flying to Washington early the next morning. It's just for the day, he assured her. I should be back on the late flight tomorrow night. Be careful, she said, concern evident in her voice. Politicians like Morgan can be dangerous when cornered. He doesn't know he's being cornered, Michael reminded her. Right now, I'm just another federal agent doing a routine briefing. After hanging up, Michael spent another hour reviewing the cybersecurity briefing materials he would present to Morgan. The information was genuine and important. Election security was a serious concern, but it was also his ticket into Morgan's office. He was about to leave when Deputy Director Pierce called. "Bennett, got a minute?" "Of course, sir." "I wanted to check in before your meeting with Morgan tomorrow. This is a delicate situation." "I understand, sir. I'll be discreet." Pierce was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's something you should know. Morgan and I have history. We attended Stanford together." Michael's interest was immediately piqued. "You were classmates?" "Yes, though we moved in different circles. Even then, Morgan had views about who belonged where. He was part of a group that tried to limit diversity initiatives at the law school." "I see," Michael said, understanding the subtext. "Did you maintain contact after graduation?" "Occasionally our paths cross at official functions," Pierce replied. "He's always cordial, but there's an undercurrent. He knows I remember who he was back then, and it makes him uncomfortable." "Why are you telling me this, sir?" Michael asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because Morgan is likely to have similar reactions to you," Pierce said bluntly. "Use that. When people are uncomfortable, they make mistakes." After the call ended, Michael sat thinking about Pierce's words. It was strange to consider that the same prejudice that had made the woman on the plane see him as a threat could be weaponized in his favor during this investigation. The irony wasn't lost on him. Early the next morning, Michael boarded a flight to Washington, D.C. This time, his experience was uneventful. No suspicious glances, no uncomfortable seatmates. He used the flight time to review his notes once more and mentally prepare for his meeting with Morgan. D.C. welcomed him with clear skies and spring warmth. A bureau car was waiting to take him directly to the Rayburn House office building where Morgan and other representatives had their offices. The building itself was imposing, a massive marble structure that projected power and permanence. Michael passed through security, his FBI credentials earning him respectful nods from the Capitol Police, and took the elevator to Morgan's floor. The congressman's office suite was marked by an American flag and the California state flag standing beside the door. Inside, the reception area was tastefully decorated with photographs of Morgan with various dignitaries, scenic landscapes from his district, and framed newspaper articles highlighting his accomplishments. A young white woman sat at the reception desk, looking up with a practiced smile as Michael entered. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "Michael Bennett, FBI," he said, showing his credentials. "I have a 2 o'clock appointment with Congressman Morgan." The receptionist's smile faltered almost imperceptibly as she glanced from his face to his ID and back again. "Of course. Let me check if the congressman is ready for you." She picked up her phone, speaking quietly into it. Michael caught fragments. "FBI agent here. Yes, the cybersecurity briefing. Should I?" After a moment, she hung up and smiled again, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "The congressman is just finishing up a call. His chief of staff will be out in a moment to escort you in." "Thank you," Michael said, taking a seat in one of the plush visitors' chairs. A few minutes later, a door opened, and a man in his early 40s emerged. He wore an expensive suit and a slightly harried expression that smoothed into professional neutrality when he spotted Michael. "Agent Bennett, David Reynolds, Congressman Morgan's chief of staff." He extended his hand. Michael stood and shook it firmly. "Thank you for accommodating this briefing on short notice." "Of course. The congressman takes cybersecurity very seriously, especially as it relates to election integrity." Reynolds gestured toward the inner office. "And please follow me." As they walked, Reynolds added in a lower voice, "Just so you know, the congressman has another meeting in 45 minutes, so we'll need to keep this brief." "I'll get right to the point," Michael assured him. Reynolds opened a heavy wooden door, revealing a spacious office with large windows overlooking the Capitol grounds. Congressman Thomas Morgan stood behind his desk, concluding a phone call. He looked up as they entered, his eyes briefly registering surprise. So brief that someone less observant than Michael might have missed it entirely. "Yes, we'll discuss it at the committee meeting tomorrow. Thank you, Richard." Morgan hung up and came around his desk, hand extended. "Agent Bennett, welcome. I appreciate the Bureau taking the time to brief me personally on this matter." Michael shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the practiced handshake of a politician. "Thank you for making time in your schedule, Congressman. These security concerns affect all Americans regardless of party." "Indeed they do," Morgan agreed, gesturing to a seating area near the window. "Please have a seat. David, could you ask Melissa to bring in some coffee?" Reynolds nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind him. Morgan settled into an armchair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and assessing. "So, Agent Bennett, tell me about these cybersecurity threats the Bureau is so concerned about." And with that, the chess match began. Michael could feel Morgan's gaze on him, evaluating, perhaps wondering why the FBI had sent this particular agent for this particular briefing. Little did he know that the real assessment was happening in reverse, with Michael cataloging every nuance of the congressman's behavior, every item in his office, every hint that might lead to evidence of his corruption. The game was on, and Michael intended to win. "The threats we're seeing are increasingly sophisticated," Michael began, opening the folder he'd brought containing the legitimate cybersecurity briefing materials. "Foreign actors are targeting not just voting machines, but the entire electoral infrastructure, voter registration databases, election official communications, even power grids in key districts." Morgan nodded, looking appropriately concerned. "I've read the intelligence reports. The Russians, Chinese, Iranians, they're all trying to undermine our democracy." "Yes, sir. But what's changed recently is the level of coordination between these actors and domestic extremist groups." Michael slid a document across the coffee table. "This assessment outlines how foreign intelligence services are providing technical support to American groups who share their interest in destabilizing our elections." Morgan picked up the document, skimming it with practiced efficiency. "Troubling, certainly. But isn't this more in the jurisdiction of Homeland Security than the FBI?" "It's a collaborative effort," Michael replied smoothly. "The Bureau handles the domestic components while working with our partners on the international aspects." A knock at the door interrupted them. Reynolds entered with a young woman carrying a tray of coffee. "Here we are," Reynolds said, as the assistant set the tray on the table and quietly exited. Morgan reached for the coffee pot. "How do you take yours, Agent Bennett?" "Black is fine, thank you," Michael replied, watching as Morgan poured 2 cups. "I've always believed that's the only proper way to drink coffee," Morgan said, handing Michael a cup. "No need to mask the true character of the brew with milk and sugar." The comment was innocuous on the surface, but Michael caught the slight emphasis on true character, a subtle dog whistle that might have gone unnoticed by someone less attuned to such linguistic patterns. "Some things are best appreciated in their natural state," Michael agreed neutrally, accepting the coffee. Reynolds excused himself, leaving them alone again. Michael used the momentary pause to glance around the office, taking in details. On the credenza behind Morgan's desk sat several framed photographs, Morgan with the president, Morgan with military leaders, Morgan with what appeared to be CEOs of major corporations. One photo in particular caught Michael's attention. Morgan on a golf course with a silver-haired man who matched the description of Richard Tanner, CEO of Sentinel Group. "So, Agent Bennett," Morgan said, settling back in his chair, "tell me why the Bureau sent you specifically for this briefing. You must have a particular expertise in this area." The question was designed to put Michael on the defensive, to make him justify his presence. It was a tactic Morgan likely used often, establishing dominance by questioning others' qualifications. "I've been working counterintelligence cases for 8 years, Michael said simply. "Most recently focusing on threats to critical infrastructure, including electoral systems." "I see." Morgan nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. "And you're based in?" "San Francisco Field Office," Michael supplied. "Ah, California, my home state." Morgan smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Though San Francisco represents a rather different California than my district." Again, the implication was clear. San Francisco, liberal, diverse, everything Morgan's conservative base opposed. "Different perspectives, same state," Michael commented, bringing the conversation back to the briefing, "which is actually relevant to our discussion about election security. Polarization makes us more vulnerable to interference." He proceeded to outline the specific threats identified by the Bureau, keeping his delivery professional and precise. All the while, he observed Morgan's reactions, noting when the congressman seemed genuinely concerned versus when he appeared to be performing concern. "What's particularly troubling," Michael said, turning to page 3 of the report, "is evidence suggesting that private security contractors might be vulnerable to infiltration by foreign intelligence." Morgan's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his coffee cup. "How so?" "These companies have access to sensitive facilities, government networks, sometimes even voting equipment," Michael explained. "Our assessment suggests they're being targeted for both data theft and potential sabotage." "Which companies?" Morgan asked, his tone carefully controlled. "The report doesn't name specific firms," Michael replied, watching Morgan's face closely. "But we're focusing on those with extensive federal contracts, particularly in areas related to critical infrastructure." Morgan set down his cup. "I hope you're not suggesting that established American security firms are compromised. These are companies that have served our government faithfully for years." "We're not making accusations," Michael assured him, "simply highlighting vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. In fact, strengthening the security protocols of these contractors would benefit everyone: the government, the companies themselves, and ultimately, the American people." Morgan seemed to relax slightly. "Of course, security should always be our priority." "Speaking of which," Michael said, as if the thought had just occurred to him, "I noticed a photograph of you with Richard Tanner. Sentinel Group has several major federal contracts, correct?" The question was casual but deliberate. Michael wanted to see how Morgan would react to the direct mention of Tanner and Sentinel. A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed Morgan's face before his political mask reasserted itself. "Yes, Richard is an old friend. Sentinel has been a reliable partner for the government for many years. They've done excellent work securing federal buildings, including some in my district. I believe they recently won a significant contract for 3 facilities in Northern California," Michael remarked, as if merely making conversation. "Yes, I think that's right," Morgan said, his tone suggesting this was barely worth noting. "The procurement process is rigorous, as I'm sure you know. Only the best firms succeed." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Certainly, though I understand Sentinel's bid wasn't the lowest." Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Agent Bennett, government contracts aren't awarded solely on cost. Quality, reliability, proven track record, these all factor into the decision." "Of course," Michael agreed. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. Security isn't a place to cut corners." The tension in the room had shifted subtly. Morgan was still smiling, still outwardly cordial, but there was a new wariness in his eyes, a calculation happening behind his political veneer. "Well," Morgan said, glancing at his watch, "this has been informative, but I'm afraid I have another appointment approaching." "Just one more item," Michael said, pulling out another document. "We've prepared some recommendations for the Homeland Security Committee regarding additional safeguards for contractors with access to sensitive systems. I'd appreciate your thoughts." Morgan accepted the document, scanning it quickly. "I'll review this in detail and have my staff follow up with any questions. The committee takes these matters seriously." "I'm sure it does," Michael replied, gathering his materials. "After all, ensuring contractors maintain the highest standards is essential to national security." Morgan stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for the briefing, Agent Bennett. Please convey my appreciation to Director Harrington." "I will," Michael said, shaking the congressman's hand. "She specifically mentioned your committee's important work." As Michael rose to leave, he deliberately took a half step too close to the credenza, causing his briefcase to bump against it. Several of the framed photos wobbled, and Michael quickly steadied them. "I apologize," he said, using the moment to get a closer look at the photo with Tanner. The golf course logo was visible on Tanner's polo shirt, Whispering Pines Golf Club, an exclusive resort in Virginia. "No harm done," Morgan said, moving toward the door, clearly eager to conclude the meeting. Reynolds was waiting outside to escort Michael out. As they walked back to the reception area, Reynolds asked, "Was the congressman able to address all your concerns?" "He was very helpful," Michael replied, "though I get the impression he's quite busy. A lot of responsibilities on the committee, I imagine." "Congressman Morgan is one of the hardest working members on the Hill," Reynolds said with practiced loyalty, "especially with the new security funding bill coming up." "Ah, yes. I've heard about that legislation," Michael commented. "Significant increase in border and domestic security funding, correct?" "Along with streamlining the contracting process," Reynolds added, then seemed to catch himself. "But I'm sure you have all those details already." At the reception area, Michael thanked Reynolds for his time and exited the office. Once in the hallway, he sent a brief text to Rodriguez. "Meeting complete. New lead to explore. Whispering Pines Golf Club, VA. Likely meeting site for Morgan and Tanner." As Michael left the Rayburn building, his phone rang. Director Harrington. "How did it go?" she asked without preamble. "Productive," Michael replied, keeping his language vague in case of eavesdroppers. "I identified a potential meeting location. Also, Morgan was clearly sensitive about Sentinel Group. When I brought them up, his entire demeanor changed. Did he suspect anything about the real investigation?" "Hard to say," Michael admitted. "He's politically skilled, good at masking his reactions. But he was definitely eager to end the meeting after Sentinel came up." "What's your assessment of him?" Michael considered the question as he walked toward his waiting bureau car. "Confident, controlled, but with an underlying arrogance. He assumes he's the smartest person in any room, which makes him vulnerable to underestimating others." "Especially you?" Harrington asked directly. "Yes," Michael confirmed without false modesty. "He tried to establish dominance immediately, questioning why I specifically was sent for the briefing. There were subtle cues throughout, nothing overtly racist, but clear indications he was surprised by my position and expertise. Will that work in our favor?" "I believe so." He relaxed when he decided I wasn't a threat, which made him less guarded than he might have been otherwise. "Good," Harrington said. "What's your next step?" "I want to look into Whispering Pines Golf Club. From what I could see in the photo, Morgan and Tanner meet there, probably off the official calendar. It could be where they discuss their arrangement." "I'll have the Washington field office assist with that angle," Harrington said. "When will you be back in San Francisco?" I'm on the 7:30 flight. Should be in the office by midnight Pacific time. Good. Deputy Director Pierce wants an update tomorrow morning. After hanging up, Michael directed the driver to take him to the Washington field office, where he could work securely until his flight. There he spent several hours reviewing what they'd gathered so far and coordinating with Rodriguez on the financial trail. "I've found something interesting," she told him over their secure line. Blue Ridge Consulting made payments to a company called Morgan Family Investments. "That sounds promising," Michael said. "Explicit connection to his name." "Yes, but here's where it gets complicated," Rodriguez continued. "Morgan Family Investments is a legitimate entity that handles investments for several Morgan families in Virginia and Maryland. Our Morgan's wife is from Virginia, but her maiden name was Peterson. No direct connection to these other Morgans that I can find yet." "Clever," Michael remarked. "Using a company with the same name as his but no official ties to him. Easy to claim coincidence if questioned." "Exactly. I'm still trying to trace who controls the specific account receiving the funds." "Keep digging," Michael encouraged her, "and look into Whispering Pines Golf Club. See if Morgan or his wife are members, or if they've hosted events there." By the time Michael boarded his flight back to San Francisco, he felt they were making progress, though significant gaps remained. Morgan was careful, using layers of separation to disguise his activities. But careful people still made mistakes, and Michael was determined to find them. The flight was half empty, allowing Michael a row to himself. As the plane reached cruising altitude, he couldn't help reflecting on the contrast with his previous flight. No accusations, no suspicion, no woman demanding he be moved. Just a quiet, uneventful journey, the kind most people took for granted. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "How did it go?" "Interesting," he replied. "Morgan is exactly who we thought he was, making progress." "Proud of you," came her response. "Marcus aced his history test. Says your quiz session helped." Michael smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Moments like this grounded him, reminded him why his work mattered. He was building a future for Marcus, one where merit would hopefully matter more than prejudice. His thoughts were interrupted by another text, this one from Chen. "Found something in Morgan's phone records. Calls to Tanner always followed by calls to unlisted number. Working on tracking it." Michael texted back, "Good work. Priority for tomorrow." He leaned back in his seat, mind racing with possibilities. Who was on the other end of those calls? Another conspirator? Someone helping launder the money? Every investigation had a weak link. Someone who talked too much, kept incriminating records, or simply wasn't as clever as they thought they were. In Morgan's case, his arrogance might be that weak link. His confidence that he could outsmart law enforcement, that his position protected him from scrutiny, that people like Michael wouldn't be smart enough to catch him. Those beliefs made him vulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on Michael. The same prejudice that had caused him grief throughout his life and career was now potentially helping him bring down a corrupt congressman. The woman on the plane had underestimated him because of his race. Morgan was doing the same. Both would come to regret it. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Michael organized his thoughts for tomorrow's briefing with Pierce. They had promising leads, but needed more concrete evidence before they could move to the next phase of the investigation. Financial records, phone logs, and witness testimony were building a circumstantial case, but they needed something definitive: an email, a recorded conversation, or a cooperating witness who could directly implicate Morgan. The wheels touched down smoothly, and Michael felt the familiar relief of returning home. Despite the late hour, he was energized by the progress they were making. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he would go home to his family, to the life he had built despite the obstacles society had placed in his way. As he exited the terminal and headed toward the parking garage, Michael spotted a familiar figure waiting near the rideshare pickup area, the woman from his earlier flight, the one who had tried to have him removed. She hadn't noticed him yet, absorbed in her phone. For a moment, Michael considered walking past without acknowledging her. Their last conversation had ended with his advice for her to reflect on her biases. But something made him pause. How different was she really from Morgan? Both had judged him based on appearance rather than substance. Both had assumed authority they didn't possess. The difference was that she had been forced to confront her prejudice directly, while Morgan remained insulated by power and privilege. Michael changed direction, heading toward her. This unexpected reunion felt significant somehow, a bookend to the story that had begun on that flight. As he approached, she looked up from her phone, her eyes widening in recognition. "Agent Bennett," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Neither did I," Michael replied, stopping a few feet away. "Returning from another trip?" She nodded, seemingly at a loss for words. The confident, entitled woman who had demanded his removal was gone, replaced by someone more uncertain, perhaps even humbled. "How have you been?" Michael asked, genuinely curious about whether their previous encounter had affected her. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about assumptions." Michael waited, giving her space to continue. "I've always considered myself a good person," she said. "Not racist, but what happened on that plane..." She shook her head. "I've been asking myself some uncomfortable questions." "That's a start," Michael acknowledged. "Recognition is the first step toward change." She met his eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "I want you to know I'm trying to do better." Michael nodded, understanding the courage it took to admit such a thing to the very person she had wronged. "That's all any of us can do. Keep trying to be better." A car pulled up, and she glanced at her phone. "That's my ride." "Take care," Michael said. As she opened the car door, she turned back. "Thank you. For not just being angry, for making me think instead." Michael watched the car drive away, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The woman was just one person, her revelation just one small step. But change happened one person at a time, one realization at a time. It wasn't enough, would never be enough on its own. But it was something. Tomorrow, he would return to the investigation, to the pursuit of a congressman who used his power to enrich himself at the expense of the public trust. The two cases, the woman's prejudice and Morgan's corruption, were different in scale but connected in essence. Both represented the abuse of privilege, the manipulation of systems designed to protect everyone but too often serving only the few. Michael turned toward his car, his resolve strengthened. There was work to be done, justice to pursue, and he was exactly the right person to do it. Morning came too quickly. Michael had gotten home well after midnight, slipping quietly into bed beside Lisa, who had stirred just enough to murmur a sleepy welcome before drifting back to sleep. Now his alarm pulled him from a dream he couldn't quite remember, something about golf courses and airplanes, fragments dissolving as consciousness took hold. He showered and dressed quickly, moving through the quiet house with practiced stealth. In the kitchen, he found a note from Lisa. "Breakfast in the fridge. Left early for deposition prep. Love you." Next to it was a second note in Marcus's less tidy handwriting. "Thanks for the history help, Dad. Got an A." Michael smiled, pinning Marcus's note to the refrigerator with a magnet before retrieving the overnight oats Lisa had prepared. He ate standing at the counter, reviewing his mental checklist for the day. The briefing with Pierce was at 8:30, followed by a full day with the investigative team. If Chen had managed to identify that unlisted number, they might have a significant breakthrough. His phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. Need to talk before Pierce briefing. Found something interesting in Morgan Family Investments. Can you come in by 8? Michael texted back his confirmation and finished his breakfast quickly. By 7:15, he was backing out of the driveway, the golden early morning light painting the neighborhood in warm hues that belied the intensity of the day ahead. Rodriguez was waiting for him in their secure room, a stack of financial documents spread across the table. She looked up as he entered, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd gotten even less sleep than he had. "You look like you've been here all night," Michael observed, setting down his briefcase. "Almost," she admitted. "I couldn't stop once I found the connection." "What connection?" Rodriguez pulled a document from the pile. "Morgan Family Investments. I kept wondering why Morgan would use a company with his own name if he was trying to hide his involvement." "And?" Michael prompted. "It's brilliant, actually," Rodriguez said, a grudging admiration in her voice. "It's hiding in plain sight. Morgan Family Investments is a legitimate company that manages investments for several unrelated Morgan families, mostly in Virginia. Our Morgan has no official connection to it. So how does it tie to him?" Rodriguez smiled triumphantly. His wife's mother's maiden name was Morgan. No direct relation to the Virginia Morgans who founded the investment firm, but enough of a connection that if he were ever questioned about money flowing from there to his personal accounts, he could claim it was family money from his wife's side. Plausible deniability, Michael nodded. Clever. "But here's where he got sloppy," Rodriguez continued, pulling out another document. "The specific MFI account receiving payments from Blue Ridge Consulting was opened 3 years ago, right after Morgan joined the Homeland Security Committee. The signatory on the account is Elizabeth Morgan, his wife, but the account manager listed on the paperwork is David Reynolds. His chief of staff," Michael said, remembering the man who had escorted him in Morgan's office. "Exactly. Reynolds has no legitimate reason to manage an investment account for his boss's wife, supposedly related to her family's money. It's a clear connection between Morgan and the bribe money." Michael examined the document, noting Reynolds' signature on the account management forms. "This is good, but not quite enough for charges. Reynolds could claim he was just helping with paperwork as a personal favor." "I know," Rodriguez acknowledged, "but it gives us grounds to look deeper. I've requested warrants for Reynolds' financial records and emails. If he's helping manage the scheme, he's likely getting a cut." "Good work," Michael said sincerely. "Let's add this to the Pierce briefing." At 8:30, they connected with Deputy Director Pierce via secure video conference. Pierce's face filled the screen, his expression serious as he greeted them from his Washington office. "Bennett, Rodriguez, good morning. What do we have?" Michael led the briefing, outlining his meeting with Morgan, the discovery of the Whispering Pines Golf Club connection, and Rodriguez's findings regarding Morgan Family Investments and David Reynolds' involvement. "The pieces are coming together," Michael concluded, "but we still need more direct evidence linking Morgan to the bribes. Right now, it's all circumstantial." Pierce nodded thoughtfully. "What about the unlisted number Chen found in Morgan's call records?" "Chen's working on that now," Michael replied. "He should have an update this morning." "This is good progress," Pierce said, "but I'm concerned about timeline. The security funding bill Morgan is pushing comes up for a committee vote in 2 weeks. If it passes with his hidden provisions intact, Sentinel stands to gain access to even more lucrative contracts with even less oversight." "We're moving as quickly as we can, sir," Michael assured him, "but we need to be thorough. If we move too soon with insufficient evidence, Morgan could slip away, and we'd lose our chance." "I understand," Pierce said, though his expression remained troubled. "There's something else you should know. I received a call from Morgan this morning." Michael's interest sharpened. "About?" "Ostensibly, he wanted to follow up on your cybersecurity briefing. but he spent most of the call asking about you, your background, your experience, how long you'd been with the Bureau. He's suspicious, Rodriguez noted. Or just curious, Michael countered. What did you tell him? The truth, Pierce replied. That you're one of our most capable agents with an exemplary record. I kept it professional, but I made it clear that I have complete confidence in you. Michael nodded, appreciating the support. How did he react? He was polite, of course. Politicians always are, but there was an undercurrent. I've known Thomas a long time. He wasn't just making conversation. He's trying to figure out if I'm a threat, Michael surmised. Good. Let him wonder. The more time he spends worrying about me, the less attention he's paying to the financial trail we're following. The briefing concluded with Pierce authorizing additional resources for the investigation and emphasizing the importance of finding conclusive evidence before the committee vote on the security bill. As they disconnected, Rodriguez gave Michael a sidelong glance. Morgan really got under your skin with those subtle jabs, didn't he? Michael considered this. Not under my skin, but I recognize the type. Men like Morgan have been underestimating me my entire career. I'm simply ready to use that to our advantage. Before Rodriguez could respond, Chen burst into the room, his usual composure replaced by excited energy. I've got it. The unlisted number. It belongs to a burner phone, but I traced the purchases. 5 identical prepaid phones bought with cash at a convenience store in Arlington 3 months ago. How does that help us? Rodriguez asked. Chen grinned. The store has security cameras. I pulled the footage. He opened his laptop, queuing up a video. Watch this. The grainy footage showed a man in a baseball cap purchasing several items at a counter. Chen froze the frame and zoomed in. Despite the cap pulled low, the face was clearly recognizable. David Reynolds, Michael said. Morgan's chief of staff, Chen confirmed. Buying burner phones for what appears to be a secure communication system between Morgan and Tanner. This connects Reynolds directly to the scheme, Michael noted. He's not just helping with paperwork. He's actively facilitating the secure communications. It gets better, Chen continued. The phones use a basic cellular network, not encrypted. With the right warrants, we can potentially access the content of those calls. Michael nodded, a plan forming. Let's move on this right away. Rodriguez, work with legal to get the warrants. Chen, I want everything on Reynolds. Financial records, travel history, communications. He's our weak link. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Michael received a text from Walsh. Former staffer agreed to talk, meeting her at 2 p.m. The investigation was accelerating. Michael felt the familiar rush that came with a case breaking open, pieces falling into place after meticulous groundwork. But he also knew that this was when cases could become most dangerous. Morgan was smart, connected, and potentially desperate if he sensed the net closing. At 2 p.m., Michael met Walsh at a quiet cafe several blocks from the federal building. Angela Keene, Morgan's former legislative aide, was already seated in a corner booth, nervously fidgeting with a paper napkin. She was in her late 20s, professionally dressed, with the alert, assessing gaze of someone who had worked in politics. Ms. Keene, Michael greeted her as he and Walsh slid into the booth. Thank you for meeting with us. I'm not sure I should be here, she said immediately, her voice low. Congressman Morgan has a lot of influence. We understand your concerns, Michael assured her. Everything you share with us today will be kept confidential until such time as it may be needed for official proceedings. And you are? She asked, glancing between them. Special Agent Michael Bennett, he introduced himself, showing his credentials. And this is Special Agent Marcus Walsh. We're investigating potential financial improprieties related to government contracts. Keene twisted the napkin tighter. I was afraid of that. I saw things during my time in his office. Nothing definitive, but concerning. What kind of things? Walsh prompted gently. Meetings that weren't on the official calendar. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. And Reynolds, David Reynolds, he handled certain matters personally. Wouldn't delegate even routine tasks if they involved specific companies. Like Sentinel Group, Michael suggested. Keene's eyes widened slightly. Yes. Anything related to Sentinel went directly to Reynolds, and sometimes directly to the congressman, bypassing the normal legislative process. Did you ever hear them discuss specific contracts or payments? Walsh asked. Keene hesitated. Not exactly, but about 6 months before I left, I overheard Reynolds on the phone saying something about the usual arrangement and making sure the committee language reflects our understanding. It was strange enough that I made a note of it. Do you still have that note? Michael asked. She nodded. I kept a private journal during my time there. After I left, I didn't know what to do with it. It seemed important to document things, but I never had enough to go to authorities. Would you be willing to share that journal with us? Michael asked. It could provide valuable context for our investigation. Keene considered this. What happens if there are charges? Would I have to testify? Potentially, Michael acknowledged, but your cooperation now would be noted and appreciated. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. I'll get you the journal, not because I want to cause trouble, but because I believe in the integrity of government. What I saw in that office, it wasn't right. After arranging details for obtaining the journal, Michael and Walsh thanked Keene and left the cafe. Outside, Walsh commented, "She's scared, but she'll follow through. Her journal could give us the timeline we need." "Let's hope so," Michael replied. "We need to move quickly now. If Morgan suspects we're closing in, he'll start covering his tracks even more carefully." Back at the federal building, Rodriguez had good news. "We got the warrants for the burner phones. The carrier is providing call logs and any text messages. Should have them by tomorrow morning." "Excellent," Michael said. "And the warrants for Reynolds' financials?" "Those too. Preliminary data shows regular deposits to an offshore account, not large enough to raise flags individually, but they add up to over $200,000 in the past 2 years. His cut, Michael surmised. "Keep digging. I want to know where every dollar came from and where it went." As the day progressed, the investigation gained momentum. Chen discovered that Reynolds had visited Whispering Pines Golf Club multiple times, always a day before Morgan and Tanner met there, presumably to secure the location and ensure privacy. Walsh's background check on Keene confirmed she was credible, with an unblemished employment history and no apparent motive to lie about her former boss. By evening, Michael was confident they were on the right track, but still concerned about the timeline. 2 weeks until the committee vote was not much time to build an airtight case against a sitting congressman. As he prepared to leave for the day, his phone rang, an unknown number. Michael hesitated, then answered. "Agent Bennett." The voice was familiar, though Michael couldn't immediately place it. "This is David Reynolds, Congressman Morgan's chief of staff. We met yesterday." Michael's instincts went on high alert. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds. What can I do for you?" "I was hoping we might meet. Privately. There are some aspects of the cybersecurity briefing the congressman would like clarified." Michael doubted this was about cybersecurity. "I'd be happy to provide any additional information the congressman needs. I can come to his office again or arrange a call." "Actually," Reynolds said, his voice tight, "I'd prefer to meet away from the office. Perhaps at the Embarcadero, near the ferry building. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. This was unexpected. Reynolds reaching out separately, requesting a private meeting away from Morgan's oversight. It could be a trap, or it could be exactly the break they needed. "I can do that," Michael agreed, keeping his tone neutral. "Is there a specific concern I should prepare for?" "I'll explain everything tomorrow," Reynolds replied. "And Agent Bennett?" Please come alone. This is sensitive." After hanging up, Michael immediately called Harrington to brief her on this development. "It could be nothing," he acknowledged, "but my instinct says Reynolds is nervous. He might be looking for a way out." "Or setting you up," Harrington cautioned. "We'll have surveillance in place, but not visible. If Reynolds is ready to talk, we don't want to spook him." "Agreed," Michael said. "If he's turning on Morgan, this could be the break we need." That night, as Michael recounted the day's developments to Lisa over a late dinner, she listened with the practiced attention of both a wife and a lawyer. When he finished, she asked the question he'd been pondering himself. "Why would Reynolds reach out to you specifically? Morgan has to have connections with more senior bureau officials." Michael considered this. Two possibilities. Either Morgan doesn't know Reynolds is making this move, or Morgan is using Reynolds to feel you out, Lisa finished, to see how much you really know. "Exactly. Tomorrow morning should be interesting." Lisa reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Be careful. Men like Morgan don't play by the rules when they're cornered." "I know," Michael assured her, "but neither do I." Dawn painted the San Francisco skyline in shades of pink and gold as Michael arrived at the Embarcadero. The morning air carried the tang of salt from the bay, and early joggers traced paths along the waterfront. Michael had arrived 20 minutes early to survey the area and confirm the surveillance team was in position. Two agents posing as morning commuters sat at a nearby cafe, while another pretended to photograph the sunrise with a camera equipped with a powerful directional microphone. Michael chose a bench facing the water, positioned to give him clear sight lines in all directions. He was dressed casually in jeans and a light jacket, still professional, but less conspicuous than his usual suit. A few feet away, a homeless man dozed on another bench. Though Michael knew he was actually Agent Walsh, his appearance altered with remarkable skill by the Bureau's disguise experts. At precisely 7 a.m., David Reynolds appeared, walking briskly along the promenade. He wore running clothes and carried a water bottle, the picture of a government official fitting in his morning exercise before work. His eyes darted nervously as he approached, scanning the area for any sign they were being watched. "Agent Bennett," he said, slowing to a stop near Michael's bench. "Thank you for meeting me." "Mr. Reynolds?" Michael nodded, gesturing to the space beside him. "Would you like to sit?" Reynolds shook his head. "I'd rather walk if you don't mind. Less chance of being overheard." Michael stood, falling into step beside the chief of staff as they began moving along the waterfront. For several moments, Reynolds said nothing, seemingly gathering his thoughts or perhaps still deciding how much to reveal. "I'm curious," Michael finally said, breaking the silence, "why you wanted to meet me specifically. If the congressman has questions about cybersecurity, there are many experts at the Bureau more versed in the technical details than I am." Reynolds glanced at him, then looked away quickly. "This isn't about cybersecurity. I think you know that." "Then what is it about, Mr. Reynolds?" Reynolds stopped walking, turning to face the water. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white with tension. "How much do you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael considered his response carefully. Reynolds was clearly nervous, possibly ready to talk, but Michael needed to gauge his sincerity. "I know enough to be concerned," he replied neutrally. "The question is, what do you know, and why are you sharing it with me?" Reynolds let out a hollow laugh. "That's very careful phrasing, Agent Bennett. I'd expect nothing less." He took a deep breath. "I know about Blue Ridge Consulting. I know about the payments from Sentinel. I know about Morgan Family Investments. I know because I set it all up." Michael kept his expression neutral, despite the internal surge of excitement. Reynolds was essentially confessing to his role in the scheme. "That's a serious admission, Mr. Reynolds." "I know what I'm doing," Reynolds said. a hint of defiance in his voice. "I've been Morgan's right hand for 8 years. I've done everything he asked, including things I knew crossed lines, but this..." He shook his head. "This has gone too far." "What changed?" Michael asked. Reynolds took a sip from his water bottle, his hand trembling slightly. "The new security bill. It doesn't just funnel more contracts to Sentinel. There's language buried in subsection 47 that would exempt certain priority contractors from standard oversight procedures. Morgan added it personally, overriding staff objections. And Sentinel would qualify as a priority contractor," Michael surmised. "They'd be at the top of the list," Reynolds confirmed. "No competitive bidding, minimal reporting requirements, direct access to sensitive government systems. It's not just corrupt, it's dangerous." Michael studied Reynolds' face, looking for signs of deception, but finding only what appeared to be genuine concern. "Why come to me? Why not go to Morgan's political opponents, or directly to law enforcement leadership?" Reynolds gave a bitter smile. "Morgan has friends on both sides of the aisle. As for law enforcement leadership, he plays golf with the FBI director's brother-in-law. But you..." He turned to face Michael fully. "He underestimates you. When you left his office, he dismissed you as just another diversity hire. His words, not mine." Michael felt a flicker of anger but kept it contained. Morgan's racism was no surprise, and in fact, it aligned perfectly with their strategy. "So you came to me because Morgan wouldn't expect it?" "Partly," Reynolds admitted, "but also because when you were in our office, you noticed things. You asked about Sentinel without being obvious about it. You studied that photo of Morgan with Tanner. You're thorough. And from what I could find about your record, you're honest. What exactly are you offering, Mr. Reynolds?" "Evidence," Reynolds said simply. "Emails, meeting notes, records of the payments. I can prove Morgan is taking bribes from Sentinel in exchange for steering contracts their way and weakening oversight." "Why now?" Michael pressed. "You've been part of this scheme for years, by your own admission. What changed?" Reynolds looked away, shame crossing his features. "I told myself it was just politics. Helping donors who helped us. That's how Washington works. But this security bill..." He shook his head. "My brother works at one of the facilities that would be guarded by Sentinel under the new arrangements. The idea that his safety could be compromised because I helped push through a corrupt contract..." He trailed off. "I guess I found my line." Michael nodded, understanding. Everyone had lines they wouldn't cross, principles that, when threatened, could awaken a dormant conscience. "If you provide evidence, you'll be implicated too. You understand that?" "I do," Reynolds acknowledged. "I'm prepared to face consequences, but I want a deal." "That would be up to the prosecutors," Michael said, "but cooperation is always considered favorably." Reynolds seemed to weigh his options one final time, then nodded decisively. "I'll get you what you need. Not all at once, that would be too suspicious. But over the next few days, I can provide enough to stop this bill and bring charges against Morgan." "And Tanner?" Michael asked. "The CEO of Sentinel?" "Him too," Reynolds confirmed. "He's as deep in this as Morgan is. Maybe deeper." They spent the next 15 minutes establishing secure communication protocols. Reynolds would use a specific email address to arrange document drops with pre-arranged code words to indicate if he was under duress or surveillance. Michael provided assurances about witness protection if it became necessary. As they prepared to part ways, Reynolds asked, "Do you think we can stop the bill in time?" "With the right evidence, yes," Michael assured him. "The committee won't vote for it if they know it's tainted by corruption." Reynolds nodded, seemingly relieved. "One more thing you should know. After your cybersecurity briefing, Morgan made some calls. He's having you investigated. Background checks, looking for pressure points, anything he can use if you become a problem." "I appreciate the warning," Michael said, though this wasn't unexpected. "But my record is clean." "It's not about finding actual dirt," Reynolds explained. "It's about finding something that can be twisted, taken out of context. Morgan has friends in the media who can spin anything." "I understand," Michael said. "We'll move quickly." As Reynolds walked away, returning to his pretense of a morning jog, Michael remained on the promenade, watching the ferry boats begin their morning crossings. The meeting had exceeded his expectations. If Reynolds delivered as promised, they would have direct evidence of Morgan's corruption, enough to bring charges and stop the security bill before it caused real damage. Walsh, still in his homeless disguise, shuffled past, murmuring, "Recorder got it all. Sounds promising." Back at the Federal Building an hour later, Michael briefed the team on Reynolds' offer. Director Harrington joined them, her expression grave as she listened to the recording of the conversation. "He sounds sincere," she commented when the playback ended, "but remember, this is a man who's been facilitating corruption for years. Proceed with caution." "Of course," Michael agreed. "We'll verify everything he provides independently, but if he delivers what he's promised, this could break the case wide open." "What about Morgan's investigation into you?" Rodriguez asked, concern evident in her voice. "Let him look," Michael said with confidence. "There's nothing to find that would compromise this case." "Still," Harrington interjected, "we should be prepared for attempts to discredit you. Morgan won't go down without a fight." The conversation was interrupted by Chen rushing into the room, his expression animated. "We got the text messages from the burner phones," he announced. "Most are just arrangements for calls or meetings, but there's one exchange that explicitly mentions payments and the security bill." He handed printouts to Michael and Harrington. The messages were brief but damning. "Advance payment processed for Q2. Blue Ridge confirmed receipt. RT. Good. Committee markup includes requested language. Full exemption from Section 5 oversight. Will update when vote scheduled. TM." "This is direct evidence linking Morgan to the payments and the bill," Michael said, studying the messages. "With Reynolds' testimony to confirm the context, this could be enough for an indictment." "We still need to establish Morgan's control of Blue Ridge more concretely," Harrington cautioned. "But we're getting close." The team spent the rest of the morning planning how to handle Reynolds' promised evidence drops and discussing strategies for the final phase of the investigation. By noon, they had a clear path forward, contingent on Reynolds following through. Michael was reviewing the operation timeline when his phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "CNN reporting on corruption investigation involving unnamed congressman. Morgan?" He quickly turned on the office television, tuning to CNN. A reporter stood outside the Capitol speaking solemnly. "Sources tell CNN that federal investigators are looking into allegations of bribery and contract manipulation involving a senior member of the House Homeland Security Committee. No names have been released, but speculation is focusing on several committee members with ties to defense and security contractors." "Damn it," Michael muttered. "Someone leaked." "Not necessarily," Harrington said, joining him in front of the screen. "This could be a general leak about the investigation without specific details. Notice they don't mention Sentinel or Morgan by name. Still, the timing is concerning," Michael noted. "Reynolds just agreed to cooperate, and suddenly there's a news report." "Could be coincidence," Harrington allowed. "Or it could be someone trying to flush out our investigation, see who reacts." Michael's phone rang. It was Reynolds. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Bennett, have you seen the news?" Reynolds sounded panicked. "Morgan's going ballistic. He's calling everyone, trying to find out who's talking to the FBI." "Stay calm," Michael advised. "The report is vague, no names mentioned. There's no reason to think you're compromised." "You don't understand," Reynolds insisted. "Morgan knows everyone's patterns, their tells. He's already suspicious of me for missing a staff meeting yesterday. I need to accelerate the timeline. What are you suggesting? I can get you the key documents tonight. All of it. Emails, payment records, the edited drafts of the security bill showing the changes Morgan made for Sentinel, but we need to meet somewhere secure. Michael glanced at Harrington, who nodded her approval. There's a bureau safe house in Marin County. I'll text you the address. Come after dark, and make sure you're not followed. I'll be there, Reynolds promised before hanging up. Is he panicking, or is this legitimate concern? Rodriguez wondered aloud. Both, probably, Michael answered. But we need those documents, and if Reynolds is ready to deliver them, we need to be ready to receive them. The rest of the day was spent preparing for the evening meeting. Security protocols were established for the safe house, evidence processing teams were put on standby, and legal advisors drafted preliminary cooperation agreements for Reynolds to review. As Michael left the federal building that evening, he called Lisa to explain he'd be home late. Be careful, she urged. If Morgan is getting desperate, this is when he's most dangerous. I will, Michael promised. Love you. The safe house was a modest ranch-style home on a quiet street in Mill Valley. Michael arrived an hour early with Rodriguez and Chen, setting up recording equipment and preparing the space. 2 agents from the surveillance team positioned themselves in neighboring houses, while Walsh coordinated from a van parked down the street. At 9:30 p.m., headlights swept the driveway as a car pulled up. Michael watched through the window as Reynolds emerged, clutching a leather messenger bag and glancing nervously around before approaching the door. Michael opened it before he could knock. Come in quickly, he directed, ushering Reynolds inside and closing the door behind him. Reynolds looked pale and drawn, his earlier composure replaced by barely contained anxiety. I think I was followed, he blurted out. Not all the way here, but earlier, leaving my apartment. A black SUV, 2 men inside. Our surveillance team didn't pick up anyone, Michael assured him. You're safe here. Reynolds didn't look convinced, but he placed his messenger bag on the table. Everything's here. Emails going back 3 years, payment records, draft versions of the security bill with Morgan's handwritten notes, calendar entries for meetings with Tanner that were kept off the official schedule. Michael opened the bag, examining the contents with Rodriguez while Chen set up a secure laptop to review any digital evidence. The documents appeared to be exactly what Reynolds had promised, a comprehensive record of Morgan's corrupt relationship with Sentinel Group. This is excellent, Michael said, looking up at Reynolds. With this evidence and your testimony, we have a solid case. Reynolds sank into a chair, the tension visibly draining from his body. What happens now? To me, I mean. You'll need to make a formal statement, Michael explained. Then we'll work with prosecutors on the terms of your cooperation agreement. Given the value of your testimony and these documents, I expect they'll be reasonable. And Morgan, when will you arrest him? We'll move quickly, but carefully, Michael said. Probably within the next 48 hours, once we've verified everything you've provided. Reynolds nodded, then looked up suddenly as a notification chimed on his phone. His face went ashen as he read the screen. What is it? Michael asked, instantly alert. A text from Morgan, Reynolds said, his voice shaking. He knows. Somehow he knows. He says. He swallowed hard. I know you're with them. Remember what happens to traitors. The safe house erupted into controlled chaos. Michael immediately contacted Walsh in the surveillance van while Rodriguez called for additional agents to secure the perimeter. Chen took Reynolds' phone, carefully preserving the threatening message as evidence while checking for any tracking software. No one followed you here, Michael assured Reynolds, who had gone pale and shaky. But we need to move you to a more secure location now. How did he know? Reynolds asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I was careful. I didn't tell anyone. We'll figure that out, Michael promised. Right now, your safety is our priority. Within minutes, Walsh entered the safe house with 2 additional agents. "Perimeter is secure," he reported. "No sign of surveillance or approaching vehicles." "Chen, what about the phone?" Michael asked. "No obvious tracking apps," Chen replied, "but it's definitely compromised somehow. I'd need more time to determine exactly how." "Leave it here," Michael instructed Reynolds. "We'll get you a secure device." Reynolds nodded numbly, still processing the sudden escalation. "He doesn't make idle threats," he said quietly. "Morgan has connections, not just political ones. He's helped some powerful people over the years, people who owe him favors." "You're under federal protection now," Michael reminded him. "The best thing you can do is help us build this case quickly and thoroughly, so we can make arrests before Morgan can do any more damage." Harrington called, her voice tense over the speakerphone. "I've authorized an emergency protective detail and expedited the warrants for Morgan's arrest. How's our witness?" "Shaken but cooperative," Michael replied. "The evidence he's provided appears comprehensive. Chen is backing it up now." "Good. I've arranged for secure transport to our high-security safe house in Oakland. And Bennett—" Harrington paused briefly. "Be careful. Morgan's looking into you, and he's apparently got sources inside the Bureau. Someone tipped him about Reynolds." "Understood," Michael said, his mind already racing through the implications. A leak within the FBI was a serious complication, one that could jeopardize not just this case but potentially others as well. As they prepared to move Reynolds, Michael pulled Rodriguez aside. "We need to compartmentalize even further. From now on, only the 4 of us, you, me, Chen, and Walsh, know the details of Reynolds' location and protection plan." "You think the leak is that high up?" Rodriguez asked, concern etching her features. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "But Morgan has had 8 years on the Homeland Security Committee to cultivate relationships with federal agencies. We can't take chances." Within 30 minutes, they had Reynolds secured in an unmarked Bureau vehicle, his phone left behind, and a change of clothes provided to alter his appearance. Michael rode with him to the Oakland safe house, using the time to get additional details about Morgan's network of influence. "He's particularly close with James Westfield at the Department of Homeland Security," Reynolds explained. "Westfield oversees the division that approves security contracts. He and Morgan were fraternity brothers at Stanford. That explains how Sentinel kept getting contracts despite mediocre performance reviews," Michael noted. "Anyone else we should know about?" Reynolds hesitated. "There's a senior FBI official that Morgan plays golf with regularly. I don't know his name, but Morgan refers to him as our friend at the Bureau." Michael exchanged a glance with Rodriguez, who was driving. This aligned with their suspicion of an internal leak. "We'll handle that," he assured Reynolds. "For now, focus on helping us prepare your formal statement." At the Oakland safe house, a fortified apartment in a nondescript building owned through Bureau shell companies, they met with Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Nguyen, who had been assigned to the case. Nguyen was a veteran prosecutor with a reputation for taking on powerful defendants without flinching. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted him crisply, "I understand you have quite a story to tell." For the next 3 hours, Reynolds provided a detailed account of the corruption scheme, with Nguyen occasionally interrupting to clarify points or request additional details. Michael and Rodriguez observed, sometimes asking follow-up questions when something touched on their investigation. By 2 a.m., they had a comprehensive statement that, combined with the documentary evidence, formed the backbone of a powerful case against both Morgan and Tanner. "This is very compelling," Nguyen acknowledged as they concluded. "We can definitely proceed with arrest warrants for Morgan and Tanner. I'll have them ready by morning." "What about the security bill?" Michael asked. "It's scheduled for committee vote in less than 2 weeks." "With this evidence, I can request an emergency injunction to delay the vote pending investigation," Nguyen replied. No judge would allow potentially corrupted legislation to proceed once they see these documents. As Nguyen left to begin preparing the legal paperwork, Michael received a call from Chen, who had remained at the original safe house with the evidence. "You need to see this," Chen said without preamble. "I've been going through Morgan's emails, and there's one from 3 days ago to someone named Westfield at DHS. It mentions you specifically." Michael tensed. "What does it say?" "It's about the incident on your flight from Atlanta," Chen replied. "Morgan asked Westfield to pull the airline's incident report and any security footage. He was specifically interested in how you handled the situation with the disruptive passenger. His words, not mine." Michael's mind raced. How had Morgan known about that incident so quickly? The airline had contacted the Bureau directly, but only a handful of people should have been aware of the details. "There's more," Chen continued. "According to these emails, Morgan has been digging into your background since your cybersecurity briefing. He's particularly interested in cases you've worked on and any potential vulnerabilities." "Send everything to my secure tablet," Michael instructed. "And Chen, don't discuss this with anyone outside our immediate team." After hanging up, Michael briefed Rodriguez on this new development. "Morgan's been targeting me specifically, trying to find something he can use against me." "Why you?" Rodriguez wondered. "Why not go after Harrington or someone higher up?" "Because I'm the one he underestimated," Michael replied. "He dismissed me during our meeting, didn't see me as a threat. Now he realizes his mistake, and he's scrambling to find a way to neutralize me before I can build a case against him." "But how did he know about the flight incident?" Rodriguez pressed. "That information wasn't widely shared." "That's what we need to find out," Michael said grimly. "Someone with access to Bureau communications is feeding information to Morgan." By dawn, they had established a secure protocol for the final phase of the investigation. Reynolds remained under guard at the safe house, while the evidence was transferred to a secure FBI facility under Nguyen's supervision. Arrest warrants were being prepared for both Morgan and Tanner, with execution planned for the following morning. Michael returned home briefly to shower and change clothes. Lisa was already awake, preparing for an early court appearance. "You look exhausted," she observed, handing him a cup of coffee. "Breakthrough in the case?" "A big one," Michael confirmed, giving her a condensed version of the developments. "We should have Morgan in custody by this time tomorrow." Lisa studied his face. "But you're worried about something else." Michael sighed, unable to hide his concerns from his perceptive wife. "There's a leak somewhere in the Bureau. Morgan's getting information he shouldn't have access to, including details about that incident on my flight from Atlanta." Lisa's expression darkened. "He's targeting you personally?" "Trying to," Michael acknowledged. "But there's nothing to find. My record is clean, my cases are solid. That doesn't mean he can't cause trouble," Lisa pointed out. "Powerful men like Morgan don't play fair when they're cornered." "I know," Michael said, "but we have the evidence now. It's just a matter of executing the arrests before he can cause any more damage." Lisa squeezed his hand. "Be careful. Promise me." "Always," Michael assured her. Back at the federal building, Michael found Harrington waiting in their secure room, her expression grave. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Morgan's calling in his markers. I just got off the phone with the director. He's asking questions about our investigation, specifically about your role in it." Michael felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Whether your judgment might be compromised by personal bias," Harrington replied, her distaste for the insinuation evident. "He cited the incident on your flight as an example of you potentially overreacting to perceived racial slights." "That's absurd," Michael said. "My handling of that situation was by the book. The airline confirmed that." "I know," Harrington assured him. "I defended you completely. But Morgan's clearly trying to undermine your credibility before we can move on him. Has it affected the arrest timeline? Not yet, Harrington said. But we need to be prepared for more attacks. Morgan's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Turn on CNN now. With a sense of foreboding, Michael switched on the office television. A serious-looking anchor was mid-sentence. Exclusive report on allegations of misconduct within the FBI's San Francisco field office. Sources claim that a senior agent may have abused his authority during a recent flight, using his position to intimidate a passenger who had questioned his behavior. The screen showed a grainy image that Michael recognized immediately, the airport security footage of his conversation with the woman from the plane after they had landed in San Francisco. "What the hell?" Rodriguez exclaimed, joining them in front of the television. The anchor continued. The agent in question is reportedly now leading a politically sensitive investigation, raising questions about potential bias. We've reached out to the FBI for comment, but have not yet received a response. Michael stared at the screen in disbelief. The report carefully avoided naming him directly, likely to avoid defamation issues, but anyone in the Bureau would know exactly who they were referring to. "Morgan's moving faster than we anticipated," Harrington said grimly. "He's trying to discredit you publicly before we can arrest him." "But how did he get that security footage?" Rodriguez wondered aloud. "That would require authorization from airport security or the airline." "Someone with influence," Michael said, his mind working through the implications. "Someone who could make a few calls and have that footage released without proper authorization." Harrington's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she turned to Michael, her expression a mixture of anger and determination. "That was the director again. He's being pressured to remove you from the investigation, citing potential conflicts of interest." "By whom?" Michael asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Congressman Williams from the Judiciary Committee," Harrington replied, one of Morgan's closest allies. "What did the director say?" "He's standing firm for now," Harrington said, "but he needs assurance that we have solid evidence, not just Reynolds' testimony. Morgan's people are already trying to paint Reynolds as a disgruntled employee with a vendetta." Michael nodded, determination replacing his initial shock. "Let's get Chen and Walsh in here. We need to accelerate everything. Morgan's showing his hand. He knows we're close and he's desperate. That gives us an advantage." As Harrington made the calls, Michael turned to Rodriguez. "We need to identify Morgan's source in the Bureau immediately. Whoever leaked that footage and the details of our investigation is the same person who warned Morgan about Reynolds. I'll start with anyone who had access to both the flight incident report and our investigation files," Rodriguez said, already moving toward her computer. Michael took a moment to center himself. Morgan was playing a dangerous game, using Michael's race as a weapon against him, suggesting that his professional judgment was compromised by racial sensitivity. It was a calculated attack designed to exploit lingering prejudices while appearing to be about professional standards rather than race. But Morgan had miscalculated. By attacking so directly, so publicly, he had revealed just how worried he was about the investigation. And a worried target made mistakes. As Chen and Walsh arrived for the emergency briefing, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. Morgan thought he could use the same old playbook: discredit, deflect, deny. But he was about to learn that times had changed. This time, the evidence would speak louder than any smear campaign. "All right," Michael said as the team assembled. "Morgan's shown his hand. Now let's show ours." The team worked with ruthless efficiency, transforming their secure room into a war room. Michael had seen enough cases to know that the next 24 hours would determine whether Morgan faced justice or escaped it. On one wall, Chen projected a digital timeline of the corruption scheme, while Walsh coordinated with surveillance teams, tracking both Morgan and Tanner. Rodriguez hunched over her computer, methodically analyzing personnel records to identify their leak. "Morgan's scheduled to appear on Capitol Beat this afternoon," Walsh reported, referring to a popular political talk show. "He'll use it as a platform to control the narrative." "Let him," Michael replied, surprising the others. "Every minute he spends trying to discredit me is a minute he's not destroying evidence or fleeing jurisdiction." Harrington entered, her expression hard. "The director's holding firm, but the pressure's increasing. Congressman Williams is now suggesting a congressional oversight hearing on our investigation methods." "A delay tactic," Michael noted. "They want to tie us up in hearings while Morgan covers his tracks." "Exactly," Harrington agreed. "Which is why we need to move on both Morgan and Tanner simultaneously as soon as Nguyen has the warrants finalized." Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "You're trending on Twitter. Don't look. Focus on your case." He appreciated her advice, but knew he needed to understand what they were facing. A quick search revealed dozens of news outlets picking up the story, with headlines ranging from the measured "FBI agent's conduct questioned amid high-profile investigation" to the inflammatory "Power trip. Federal agent used badge to intimidate innocent passenger." Several conservative commentators were already connecting dots that weren't there, suggesting Michael was pursuing Morgan for political reasons. One tweet with thousands of shares read, "Congressman Morgan fights for border security, suddenly finds himself targeted by FBI agent with history of seeing racism everywhere. Coincidence?" "It's getting ugly out there," Chen observed, glancing at Michael's screen. "Let it," Michael said firmly. "The evidence is what matters, not the noise." Rodriguez looked up from her computer, excitement breaking through her professional composure. "I think I found our leak. Edward Simmons, Assistant Special Agent in charge of internal affairs. He accessed both your flight incident report and our investigation files within hours of Morgan contacting that DHS official Westfield." "Simmons," Michael repeated, the name immediately registering. "He plays golf at Congressional. I've seen his name on the membership roster during previous investigations." "The same club where Morgan's a member," Walsh added. Harrington's expression darkened. "I want his communications, his financial records, everything. If he's compromised an active investigation, I want him in handcuffs by sundown." As Harrington left to secure the necessary warrants for Simmons, Michael's phone rang. Deputy Director Pierce. "Bennett, I've just seen the CNN piece," Pierce said without preamble. "It's a hit job, plain and simple." "Yes, sir. We believe we've identified the source of the leak." "Good, but that's not why I'm calling." Pierce's voice lowered. "Morgan just requested a meeting with me. Said he wants to discuss concerns about the San Francisco field office." Michael straightened. "When?" "1 hour from now, in my office." Pierce paused. "I think we can use this to our advantage." "How so, sir?" "I'll meet with him. Express appropriate concern about the news reports. Let him think he's making headway. Meanwhile, you accelerate the arrests. By the time he leaves my office, it should be too late for him to do anything about it." "That could work," Michael agreed. "But sir, be careful. Morgan's desperate, and he clearly has sources inside the Bureau." "Don't worry about me," Pierce said with grim determination. "I've been dealing with Thomas Morgan's type since Stanford. I know exactly how to handle him." After hanging up, Michael briefed the team on this new development, then called Nguyen for an update on the warrants. "Just getting them signed now," she confirmed. "We'll have them within the hour." "We need to move immediately," Michael stressed. "Morgan's meeting with Deputy Director Pierce in an hour, which gives us a window of opportunity while he's occupied." "Understood. I'll have the warrants delivered to you directly. What about Simmons?" "Harrington's handling that separately. Focus on Morgan and Tanner for now." The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of coordinated activity. Arrest teams were assembled and briefed. Surveillance confirmed both targets' locations, and Rodriguez prepared a comprehensive briefing package for the inevitable press conference. Michael's phone buzzed with another text from Lisa. "Morgan's on TV now, calling for your removal." Turning to the office television, Michael watched as Morgan appeared on Capitol Beat, the very image of righteous concern in an expertly tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression grave. "I'm deeply troubled by what appears to be a pattern of behavior," Morgan was saying. "When federal agents allow personal biases to influence investigations, it undermines public trust in our institutions." The host, clearly enjoying the controversy, pressed for details. "Are you suggesting the FBI is targeting you for political reasons, Congressman?" Morgan adopted an expression of reluctant candor. "I don't want to believe that. But when an agent with a documented history of racial grievances suddenly begins investigating a senior member of the Homeland Security Committee just weeks before a crucial vote on border security." He spread his hands in a gesture of regretful implication. Michael watched dispassionately, recognizing the calculated performance for what it was. Morgan was playing to his base, establishing a narrative of persecution that would shield him from the coming allegations. "He's good," Walsh observed. "If I didn't know better, I'd almost believe him." "People like Morgan always are," Michael replied. "They've spent their lives crafting personas that obscure their true nature." The office door opened, and Nguyen entered with a folder. "Arrest warrants, signed and ready," she announced, handing them to Michael. Judge Harrison was particularly interested in the evidence regarding the security bill modifications. "Perfect timing," Michael said, checking his watch. "Morgan should be arriving at Pierce's office right about now." As if on cue, his phone rang, Pierce's assistant. "Deputy Director Pierce asked me to inform you that Congressman Morgan has arrived for their meeting." "Thank you," Michael replied. "Please let the Deputy Director know that we're proceeding as discussed." Michael turned to the team. "This is it. Morgan's with Pierce, Tanner's at Sentinel's headquarters, and we have our warrants. Walsh, you'll lead the team arresting Tanner. Rodriguez, you're with me for Morgan. Chen, coordinate from here and make sure all evidence is properly secured." As they prepared to depart, Harrington called. "Simmons is in custody," she reported. "Caught him trying to delete communications with Morgan. He's already asking about a deal." "Good work," Michael said. "We're moving on Morgan and Tanner now." "Be careful," Harrington cautioned. "Morgan still has friends we don't know about." The drive to FBI headquarters in Washington, where Pierce's office was located, took 20 minutes. Michael used the time to mentally prepare for the confrontation ahead. Morgan would be furious, cornered, and potentially dangerous. The congressman had spent decades building his power and influence. He wouldn't surrender it without a fight. Rodriguez, sitting beside him in the bureau SUV, glanced over. "Nervous?" "Focused," Michael corrected. "Morgan spent the last 48 hours trying to discredit me, destroy my reputation, and undermine this investigation. I'm looking forward to seeing his face when he realizes none of it worked." They arrived at headquarters and were escorted directly to Pierce's office suite. The assistant looked up anxiously as they entered. "They're still in there," she whispered, nodding toward the closed door. "It's been intense." Michael approached the door, Rodriguez and 2 additional agents positioned behind him. He could hear raised voices from within, Morgan's cultured baritone rising in what sounded like indignation, Pierce's deeper voice responding with calm authority. He knocked firmly. The voices inside fell silent. After a moment, Pierce called, "Come in." Michael opened the door to find Morgan standing in front of Pierce's desk, his face flushed with anger that quickly transformed to shock at the sight of Michael. "What is the meaning of this?" Morgan demanded, looking from Michael to Pierce. "Congressman Thomas Morgan," Michael said formally, stepping into the office. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of bribery, conspiracy, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice." Morgan's face went from red to ashen. "This is outrageous," Pierce, you set me up. Pierce rose from behind his desk, his expression impassive. No, Thomas. You set yourself up the moment you decided to take bribes from Sentinel Group. This is a political witch hunt, Morgan sputtered, backing away as Rodriguez entered with the other agents. I'll have all your badges for this. You're welcome to explain that to the judge, Michael replied evenly, along with your attempts to undermine this investigation by leaking confidential information and orchestrating a media smear campaign. Morgan's eyes narrowed, his initial shock hardening into cold fury. You think you've won? You have no idea who you're dealing with. One phone call and I can... Your phone calls won't help you anymore, Michael interrupted, nodding to Rodriguez, who stepped forward with handcuffs. Agent Simmons is already in custody, and Richard Tanner is being arrested as we speak. David Reynolds has provided a complete account of your corruption scheme backed by extensive documentation. At the mention of Reynolds, Morgan seemed to deflate slightly. Reynolds, he muttered. I should have known that spineless... Sir, please place your hands behind your back, Rodriguez instructed firmly. Morgan looked at Pierce one last time, a mixture of betrayal and disbelief in his eyes. After everything we've been through, Calvin, Stanford, all these years? That's why this hurts so much, Thomas, Pierce replied quietly. I knew who you were back then. I had hoped you'd changed. As Rodriguez secured the handcuffs, Michael read Morgan his rights. The congressman remained silent, his earlier bluster replaced by cold calculation as he assessed his situation. We'll need your personal devices, Congressman, Michael said. Phone, tablet, any electronics you have with you. My phone contains privileged congressional communications, Morgan objected. You have no right. The warrant covers all electronic devices, Michael replied calmly. Your attorney can file the appropriate motions if you believe any content is privileged. Morgan reluctantly allowed Rodriguez to retrieve his phone and tablet from his briefcase. As she did so, his gaze locked with Michael's, hatred burning in his eyes. You think this is about justice, Morgan said, his voice low and venomous. But we both know what it's really about, don't we? You people always have to prove something. Michael met his gaze steadily. This isn't about me, Congressman. It's about the laws you broke, the trust you betrayed, and the American people you were elected to serve. Morgan's lip curled in a sneer. Save the speeches. You targeted me because I threatened your agenda. No, Michael corrected him. I investigated you because evidence suggested you were corrupt. The fact that you immediately assumed it was about race says more about you than it does about me. For a moment, Morgan seemed genuinely taken aback, as if this perspective had never occurred to him. Then his political mask slipped back into place, the calculating look returning to his eyes. We'll see how this plays out, he said, his tone almost conversational now. I have friends in the Justice Department, friends in the media. This arrest will be yesterday's news by the time my lawyers are finished. Perhaps, Michael acknowledged, but the evidence won't change. As they escorted Morgan from the office, cameras were already gathered in the lobby. Someone had tipped off the press. Morgan straightened his shoulders, adopting the dignified bearing of a man wrongfully persecuted. Michael noticed the subtle transformation with professional admiration. Even in handcuffs, Morgan was performing, already crafting his narrative of political victimhood. Outside, a larger media contingent waited. Flashbulbs erupted as Morgan emerged between Michael and Rodriguez, the silver-haired congressman walking with his head high despite the handcuffs. Congressman Morgan, do you have any comment on your arrest? Is this related to the security funding bill? Do you deny the allegations of bribery? Morgan paused, looking directly into the cameras. I categorically deny all allegations. This is a politically motivated attack on a vocal defender of American security. The truth will vindicate me completely. As they guided him toward the waiting bureau vehicle, Morgan turned his head slightly toward Michael. "You realize they're using you, don't you?" he murmured, too low for the cameras to pick up. "When this is over, no matter how it ends, you'll still be the black agent who arrested a white congressman. That's all they'll ever see." Michael said nothing as he helped Morgan into the vehicle. The congressman's attempt to provoke him was transparent, a last-ditch effort to elicit some reaction that could later be characterized as bias or unprofessionalism. As the car pulled away, Pierce joined Michael on the steps. "Well done," he said quietly. "How did the Tanner arrest go?" Michael checked his phone. "Walsh reports he's in custody without incident. Both operations successful." Pierce nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Morgan's last comment to you, I can guess what it was about." "Just more of the same," Michael replied, "trying to make this about race instead of corruption." "It's his only play now," Pierce observed. "When the evidence is against you, attack the investigator." He placed a hand briefly on Michael's shoulder. "For what it's worth, the director is extremely pleased with how you handled this case." As they turned to go back inside, away from the clamoring press, Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Just saw the news. So proud of you. Come home safe." Despite the tension of the day, Michael smiled. Morgan was wrong. When this was over, he wouldn't just be the black agent who made the arrest. He would be the professional who followed the evidence, maintained his integrity despite personal attacks, and brought a corrupt politician to justice. And that was what really mattered. 3 weeks later, Michael sat in the witness gallery of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room, watching as Senator Eleanor Hayes questioned Richard Tanner about his company's relationship with Congressman Morgan. The CEO of Sentinel Group had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency, and his testimony today was part of that agreement. "So, to be clear, Mr. Tanner," Senator Hayes was saying, her voice carrying easily through the packed chamber, "you're telling this committee that Congressman Morgan explicitly promised to insert language into the Homeland Security funding bill that would exempt your company from standard oversight procedures." Tanner, looking considerably less polished than in his corporate headshots, nodded. "Yes, Senator. The language in subsection 47 was drafted specifically at our request, with the understanding that Sentinel would receive preferential treatment in contract awards. And in exchange for this preferential treatment, your company made payments to Blue Ridge Consulting, which then transferred funds to Morgan Family Investments, which ultimately benefited Congressman Morgan." "That's correct," Tanner confirmed. "The arrangement was designed to obscure the connection between Sentinel's payments and the congressman's personal finances." Michael observed the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. The case against Morgan had expanded beyond their initial findings, with investigators uncovering similar arrangements with 2 other contractors. Morgan himself had not yet gone to trial, but his legal situation looked increasingly dire with each new revelation. After Tanner's testimony concluded, Michael slipped out of the hearing room to find Rodriguez waiting in the hallway. "How'd it go in there?" she asked. "Tanner's singing like a canary," Michael replied. "He just implicated Morgan in explicit terms on the record." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Morgan's lawyers reached out to Nguyen again this morning. They're finally talking plea deal." "Smart move," Michael commented. With Reynolds and Tanner both testifying against him and Simmons providing details about the leak operation, a trial would be devastating. "Speaking of Simmons," Rodriguez said, checking her phone, "his plea agreement just came through. 5 years reduced from 12 in exchange for his cooperation against other potentially compromised agents." The revelation that Simmons had been feeding information to Morgan for years had prompted a broader investigation into potential corruption within the Bureau. So far, 2 other agents had been identified as having improper relationships with subjects of investigations. It was painful for the FBI, but necessary for maintaining the integrity of the institution. "Director's press conference is at 2, Rodriguez reminded him. "Harrington wants us both there, but in the background." Michael checked his watch. "That gives us time to grab lunch. I'm meeting Lisa at Riverside Cafe in 20 minutes. Want to join us?" "Thanks, but I've got a mountain of paperwork waiting," Rodriguez declined. "I'll see you at the press conference." As Michael walked toward the Capitol exit, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Agent Bennett, this is Catherine Miller. I saw you're in D.C. for the hearings. Could we possibly meet? I'd like to apologize in person." Michael stopped walking, surprised. Catherine Miller, the woman from the plane. He hadn't heard from her since their brief encounter at the San Francisco airport. How had she gotten his number? More importantly, why was she reaching out now? Curiosity won out. He texted back, "I'm heading to Riverside Cafe near the Capitol to meet my wife for lunch. You're welcome to join us briefly." "Thank you. I'll be there in 30 minutes, came the swift reply. Michael continued toward the exit, mulling over this unexpected development. After Morgan's arrest, the story about the plane incident had evolved from an attempted smear into a footnote in the larger corruption narrative. Once the full details emerged, including how Morgan had obtained the airport security footage through improper channels, public opinion had shifted decidedly in Michael's favor. Outside, Washington, D.C. basked in the warmth of late spring sunshine. The cherry blossoms had faded, but the city remained vibrant with tourists and the ever-present bustle of government business. Michael walked the few blocks to Riverside Cafe, enjoying the momentary solitude after the intensity of the hearing. Lisa was already waiting at an outdoor table, looking elegant in a navy blue suit, her legal briefs neatly stacked beside her water glass. She rose to greet him with a kiss. "How was the hearing?" she asked as they sat down. "Productive," Michael replied. "Tanner confirmed everything we suspected about Morgan's involvement. The committee members were appropriately outraged." Lisa smiled knowingly. Politicians do love to express outrage at corruption, especially when it's not their own. "Cynical, counselor," Michael teased. "Realistic," she corrected. "But I am glad Morgan's being held accountable. Your team did excellent work." Michael hesitated, then said, "We may have company for lunch. Catherine Miller asked to meet me." Lisa's eyebrows rose. "The woman from the plane? How did she even get your contact information?" "I'm not sure," Michael admitted, "but she said she wants to apologize in person." "Interesting timing," Lisa observed. "Now that Morgan's case is headline news and your handling of the plane incident has been vindicated." "Maybe," Michael acknowledged. "But people can change. Sometimes it just takes a catalyst." 20 minutes later, as they were finishing their salads, Michael spotted a woman approaching their table hesitantly. Catherine Miller looked different from his memories of the plane, more subdued, less entitled in her bearing. She wore a simple blouse and pants, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Agent Bennett," she said as she reached their table. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Michael stood politely. "Ms. Miller, this is my wife, Lisa Bennett." Catherine nodded to Lisa, clearly nervous. "I appreciate you allowing me to interrupt your lunch. I won't take much of your time." "Please sit," Lisa offered, her tone professional but not unfriendly. Catherine sat down, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been following the news about Congressman Morgan and the corruption investigation. Your name keeps coming up as the agent who led the case." "That's correct," Michael confirmed, curious about where this was going. "When I realized you were the same agent from my incident on the plane, I felt compelled to reach out." She took a deep breath. "What I did was inexcusable. I judged you based solely on your appearance, and I created a scene that should never have happened." Michael remained silent, giving her space to continue. After our conversation at the airport, I started to examine my own thinking, my own biases. Catherine continued. It wasn't comfortable. I've always